Hey guys, tonight, we're going somewhere you're definitely not supposed to be. You're standing alone in the stillness of a dusty plain, the air oddly quiet, the wind just brushing against your face like it's trying not to disturb something older than memory. Before you stands what looks like just another hill. Maybe it's nothing, just a bump in the land, a trick of erosion and time. But deep beneath this mound lies the most enigmatic tomb in Chinese history. A chamber no one has ever entered, a world built to last forever, and possibly never meant to be seen again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? Leave a comment below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift your weight slightly, feet sinking into soft earth as you stare at the silent rise of Mount Li. You'd never guess what's beneath you, the sealed tomb of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. The same man who united 7 warring states, ordered the construction of the first Great Wall, and apparently planned his own eternity with the kind of ambition that makes modern billionaires look lazy. This tomb has been closed for over 2,000 years. It was first discovered in the 1970s, not because someone was looking for it, but because someone tripped over its army. You might have heard of the terracotta warriors, those silent clay soldiers buried in trenches around the tomb. Over 8,000 of them, each one different, each one standing as though they're on the edge of war, or maybe already watching something the rest of us can't see. They were guarding something, but not a king, an idea, or maybe a secret. The actual burial chamber where the emperor himself is said to rest has never been opened, never touched, never scanned with anything stronger than radar. And it's not because archaeologists aren't interested. They are. Oh, they are. But the Chinese government has made it clear until technology is advanced enough to protect whatever's inside, no one's going in. And yes, they have their reasons. Ancient texts, specifically from the historian Sima Qian, describe a tomb unlike any other. A subterranean palace with ceilings studded in pearls to mimic the night sky, flowing rivers of mercury representing China's greatest waterways, and traps, booby traps, mind you, set to protect the emperor in death the same way he was protected in life. Historians still argue whether those details were poetic exaggeration or something more literal. After all, when soil samples around the mound were tested, researchers found abnormally high levels of mercury. Not just a little, a lot. Enough to make you raise an eyebrow or maybe wear a hazmat suit. You imagine those rivers quiet, toxic, and perhaps still flowing beneath layers of stone and soil. What were they meant for? Was it symbolic ritual? Or were they, bear with me, here meant to power something? Fringe theorists love this one. Some believe the tomb contains not just gold and jade, but technology, star maps, mechanical models of the heavens, even artifacts that don't belong to our timeline. There are rumors, always rumors, of traps with automatic release systems, sealed mechanisms that would activate if someone disturbed the chamber. The radar scans too are tantalizing. Ground-penetrating imaging has shown intricate structures beneath the mound. Staircases, corridors, walls that zigzag in patterns no one has mapped completely. Some say it's a full-scale replica of the imperial capital, above, built underground in a mirror image. A city for the afterlife. But if that's true, why bury it? Was this about glory, legacy, or was it about hiding something? There's a theory, again not mainstream, that suggests Qin Shi Huang may have known or discovered something he wasn't supposed to. Ancient knowledge, a map of the stars, a code hidden in the heavens, something so important he needed to preserve it forever, or conceal it forever. And maybe both. You stand there still listening to the emptiness around Mount Li. Not a sound comes from beneath the ground. But that's the thing about secrets, they don't whisper. They wait, quietly, until someone listens close enough. So for now, the emperor rests. Not because we can't reach him, but because perhaps we're not ready to know what lies behind that final stone door. And maybe we never will be. You're still standing near Mount Lee, but now your attention drifts a little to the east, where the air feels heavier, like it's charged with some ancient expectation. Not far from the sealed tomb lies a silent battalion spread across trenches like a clay memory of war. You descend slowly, your feet crunching softly on the path, and before you know it, you're surrounded. Warriors to your left, archers to your right, and somewhere behind you, a general who hasn't blinked in over 2,000 years. They call it the Terracotta Army, but that name doesn't quite prepare you for how alive it all feels. There are over 8,000 life-size statues here, and not one of them is identical. Each has a different expression, different ears, eyebrows, cheekbones. Some look bored, others focused, a few vaguely annoyed, like someone's taken them away from tea and thrust them into an eternal shift. And they weren't just plopped into place randomly. The soldiers are arranged in precise military formations, officers in front, infantry in rows, horses tethered to chariots carved out of clay, frozen mid-motion. You start to wonder, were these just ceremonial guardians? Or is this some kind of message? A playbook? A map? Historians agree the army was built to protect Qin Shi Huang in the afterlife. That much at least seems relatively clear. But how they were made, why they were buried the way they were, and whether there's more waiting beneath the dirt, those are still very much open questions. Let's start with construction. These weren't sculpted one by one in painstaking detail. No ancient Chinese artisans were efficient. They used a modular system, torsos from one mold, legs from another, arms interchangeable, like a giant human Lego set. But what makes it haunting is that the heads and faces were done last, by hand, uniquely. It's as if the emperor wanted them to look real, like actual people, real memories, perhaps real souls. Some archaeologists believe the faces were modeled after actual soldiers from the emperor's armies. Others argue they represent archetypes from different regions of China meant to reflect the unity of his empire. Still, others suggest something far stranger, that the uniqueness was essential for ritual purposes. That the statues weren't just likenesses, but vessels. Vessels meant to contain something, energy, spirit, memory, or as some fringe thinkers whisper, consciousness itself. It's not just the design that unsettles you, it's the fact that this massive project left behind almost no written documentation. Think about that. Thousands of artisans, workers, and slaves labored for years, possibly decades, on one of the most ambitious construction efforts in history, and yet no records, no diary, no wall carving saying, "Dear history, here's how we pulled this off." Historians still argue whether this was because of secrecy, imperial control, or something more elusive, perhaps even shame. Could it be that this wasn't just a display of power, but a desperate attempt to contain something the emperor didn't understand? Let's talk materials for a moment. The warriors were once painted in vivid color, reds, greens, even purples. But when exposed to air, those pigments flake off almost instantly. You look around now, and all you see is dull gray. But once they would have shimmered under torchlight, as if they were alive. Some of them still carry bronze weapons, swords, and arrowheads that are shockingly well preserved. At first, scientists believed they'd been treated with chromium, a modern anti-rust coating. That idea was later debunked, but the weapons are still weirdly pristine. Were they made with a forgotten alloy? A lost technique? Or is there something in the soil here that resists time? Then, there's the layout of the site. The placement of the warriors seems to align with known military formations from ancient Chinese war manuals. But others have pointed out stranger correspondences, like certain soldiers' positions matching star constellations, especially those associated with death and protection in Taoist cosmology. Now you're starting to wonder, was this not just an army, but a celestial map, a snapshot of the heavens at the moment of the emperor's death? Or worse, was it a model for something coming in the future? Some of the unexcavated pits around the complex show strange readings on radar, vaults that are sealed tight. And there are stories whispers really that other artifacts lie buried beyond the warriors. Beasts sculpted in stone, machines of unknown purpose, even fragments of what some describe as non-human anatomy. No one has confirmed these claims, but they refuse to die. Just like the army itself, even now some of the pits remain untouched, not for preservation reasons, but because researchers aren't sure what's inside. There's a strange fear in the air, a sort of cultural hesitation. What happens if we dig too far? Remember, these warriors weren't created randomly. They were planned, placed, oriented towards something. Could it be that they form part of a larger geometric pattern, some kind of terrestrial circuitry? You wouldn't be the first to suggest it. Chinese geomancy, better known as feng shui, was deeply integrated into architecture, tomb design, and even city layout during the Qin dynasty. Some scholars now believe the terracotta army, the tomb itself, and the surrounding structures were part of a massive multi-layered energetic design meant not just to honor the dead, but to channel and manipulate cosmic forces. You glance up, imagining the soldiers coming alive under a night sky thick with stars. You try to picture that moment thousands of years ago when the last artisan stepped away from his creation, knowing he would never see it again, that no one would for millennia. And still, they wait, and here you are, standing among them, the silent ones. You wonder, who were these men? What did they see in their lifetimes? Did they fight willingly for the emperor? Were they honored to be immortalized in clay? Or was it something darker, an obligation no one could refuse? There's a strange comfort in their stillness, but also a weight. You feel it in your chest, a presence, like you're being watched but not in a threatening way, more like remembered. So you take one last look at the nearest warrior. His face is calm, determined, kind of familiar, and for just a moment you imagine he could blink, but he doesn't. And you walk on. You leave behind the clay soldiers, their unblinking gaze still brushing against the back of your neck, and make your way toward the southwest, toward something even stranger. Not a tomb, not a monument, but a mystery civilization that should never have existed. You descend into the humid basin of Sichuan province, where the mists cling low to the ground, veiling what archaeologists only discovered by accident in 1986, a site that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about ancient China. You're standing in Sanxingdui. You've probably never heard of it. Most people haven't. And yet, what lies buried here is unlike anything found anywhere else in China or the world. It begins with the masks. Massive bronze masks, some as wide as a doorframe, with bulging almond-shaped eyes that protrude outwards like telescopes. Long, straight noses, grinning mouths. Some have vertical slits that seem more reptilian than human. You don't just look at these masks, they look back. Archaeologists pulled these artifacts out of two large sacrificial pits, filled with shattered jade, ivory, gold scepters, bronze trees, and ceremonial items that seem to have been deliberately destroyed before burial. Like someone wanted to offer them, but also conceal them. Historians still argue whether Sanxingdui was an offshoot of the Shang dynasty or an independent culture entirely. The prevailing theory now is that it was something different, something isolated, possibly even something older. The carbon dating of wood fragments suggests Sanxingdui peaked around 1200 BCE. But here's the kicker: there's no written language found on site, no records, no scrolls, no bones with inscriptions. A full-blown civilization that left behind incredible technology and zero documentation. Some mainstream scholars call Sanxingdui an anomalous outlier. Others say it's evidence of a lost Bronze Age kingdom, one that was intentionally forgotten or buried under imperial unification centuries later. And then there are the fringe theories. One of the most famous speculations, which gets whispered at midnight conferences and late-night YouTube rabbit holes, is that Sanxingdui was not human, or at least not entirely. Let's look again at those masks. The eyes aren't just strange, they're functional. Some theorists suggest they were worn during rituals, the exaggerated eye extensions designed to evoke or possibly allow some kind of altered perception. Others go a step further. The masks represent what these people actually saw, or what they were visited by. Ancient astronaut enthusiasts love this one. The strange proportions, the antenna-like headgear on some of the statues, and the use of gold and magnetized jade, it all fits the pattern they're always chasing. But even without resorting to aliens, the questions linger. Who were the Sanxingdui people really? And why did they disappear? Because disappear they did. Suddenly, abruptly, without a trace. The city showed signs of fire, possibly flooding. After that, the culture simply vanished. Later, civilizations in the region show no continuation of their art or ritual. It's as if Sanxingdui was cut off from history like a surgically removed limb. Even more confusing, a second nearby site, Jinsha, was discovered in 2001. It appears to be culturally related to Sanxingdui, but again, the artifacts are buried in a way that suggests deliberate destruction. And no writing. You crouch near one of the reconstructed displays, your eyes tracing the spiraled patterns on a bronze tree. Yes, a tree made entirely of bronze. It has birds perched on its branches and coils that seem to represent the cycle of the sun or stars. The craftsmanship is flawless. This isn't the work of an isolated village. This is industrial-grade Bronze Age art made by people who understood metallurgy, geometry, astronomy, and possibly something more. There's something haunting about a civilization that leaves behind its gods, but none of its names. You try to picture the last day here, the smoke from ritual fires rising into a red sky, the high priests fitting their masks into place, the sound of drums echoing down the river. And then, silence. Archaeologists believe the Sanxingdui people may have migrated after a catastrophe, possibly a massive earthquake or river flood. Some suggest they moved inland, merged with the Shu kingdom, and their unique culture was absorbed and forgotten. But others think they didn't merge. They dissolved. Intentionally. What if Sanxingdui wasn't destroyed by accident, but erased on purpose? You turn slowly, surrounded now by replicas and castings of figures that don't quite feel human. One statue stands 8 feet tall, with oversized hands held forward like it's offering something, or reaching. Its eyes are wide, unblinking, and maybe seeing more than you do. The materials used at Sanxingdui also raise eyebrows. The bronze is unusually high in lead content, which would have made it soft and glossy, almost otherworldly when new. And the gold foil found there, wafer-thin sheets used for ceremonial wrapping, suggests knowledge of smelting and gilding beyond what was typical at the time. Then, there's the layout of the site itself. The sacrificial pits weren't aligned with cardinal directions. Instead, they followed some internal logic, possibly a cosmological scheme we no longer understand. Why 2 pits? Why only certain objects? Why destroy them before burial? Here's where things get weird. Some of the jade artifacts in the pits are clearly not from Sichuan. They originated hundreds of miles away, which means Sanxingdui was either part of a vast trade network, or it had knowledge of distant lands long before Chinese cartography ever began. And that brings you to the big question. How did a civilization this advanced, this unique, this clearly connected leave behind so little? Maybe they didn't. Maybe we just haven't found it yet. Or maybe they meant for us not to. You imagine archaeologists centuries from now stumbling across our own buried cities, plastic bones, rusted smartphones, strange monuments to pop stars, and wondering what kind of people we were. It's humbling and a little eerie. But here, under the weight of Sanxing Dui's long silence, you feel something else too awe. These people might not have left us words, but they left us a question. One so big it spans centuries. Who builds statues that don't look like themselves? Who makes masks to see the unseen? And why did they bury it all? The mist curls around your ankles as you rise to leave. You turn back once more to the bronze faces watching you, and wonder if maybe they remember everything. The mist follows you as you move further east, but now it begins to change thicker, cooler, almost unnaturally still. You reach a quiet stretch of countryside in Zhejiang province, and there beyond the rice fields and bamboo groves is something that doesn't belong. A hole. Then another. Then an entire opening in the earth leading downward. You stand at the mouth of one of the strangest mysteries in all of China, the Longyu Caves. At first glance, they might just look like quarries' empty stone chambers carved deep into the bedrock. But you descend the steps and quickly realize this isn't natural. This isn't haphazard. And this definitely isn't modern. The walls are smooth. The ceilings arch perfectly. Every inch of stone is carved with symmetrical repeating lines, chiseled grooves that form a sort of diagonal ripple covering thousands of square meters. Not one slip of the hand, not one crooked mark, just perfect geometry extending into the dark. There are at least 24 of these underground chambers, each of them massive, some as tall as a 5-story building, all carved entirely by hand. And here's the kicker, no one knows who did it. No one knows how, and no one knows why. They were discovered only recently in 1992, when a group of local farmers decided to drain a small pond. What they found beneath the water shocked them, a hollow stone chamber, its walls vanishing into shadow. And once they went further, they discovered more caves all interconnected like silent cathedrals beneath the soil. No tools were left behind, no inscriptions, no drawings, not even a legend or rumor in the area's folklore. Nothing. Historians still argue whether these caves were built during the Qin dynasty, the Han dynasty, or even earlier. But the truth is, they don't fit neatly into any known historical timeline. The sheer volume of stone removed, estimated at over 1 million cubic meters, would have required years of labor coordination and logistical support. And yet, the effort is never mentioned in any local or imperial records. It's like building a skyscraper, then somehow erasing every blueprint, payroll, and construction photo ever taken. And what were they used for? That's the million-dollar question. They're too symmetrical and clean to be natural caves. They don't resemble typical storage or mining tunnels. There's no soot, no indication of torches or fires, no burial remains, no water systems. And yet, they exist. Some believe they were meant to be underground palaces designed for meditation ritual or shelter. Others propose more utilitarian theories, grain storage, hidden barracks, or even ancient prisons. But none of these fit quite right. The level of effort chiseling down dozens of meters through bedrock, carving uniform patterns over every surface doesn't make sense for mundane use. You run your hand along the groove of a wall. The carving pattern is hypnotic, almost like the inside of a seashell. And it's consistent across every room, across every cave, suggesting that it wasn't just artistic choice. It was instruction, a code. Some fringe researchers argue that the diagonal striations might have acoustic properties, creating resonance patterns for chanting or sound healing. Others go further, suggesting these caves could have acted as giant frequency chambers, amplifying vibrations in specific ways we no longer understand. You laugh softly to yourself. Sound temples. It sounds ridiculous. But then you speak aloud, just a whisper. And it echoes perfectly, not like a tunnel, like a hall. The kind of echo you'd find in a cathedral, where every note bounces off curves and corners to arrive at a single center. The architecture here isn't just practical, it's musical. And there's more. Some of the caves are aligned almost precisely along north-south axes. Others intersect at what appear to be golden ratios. A few are even believed to match celestial constellations. But without artifacts or writing, it's hard to say whether this was coincidence or deliberate. Still, it makes you wonder, was this just architecture or a form of memory? A message from a civilization that left no other trace? One cave in particular shows signs of structural collapse. A wall caved in under centuries of pressure, revealing what may have once been an unfinished corridor. And beyond that, perhaps more chambers. Possibly hundreds. Maybe even an entire underground network that's never seen daylight. You picture ancient workers lit by oil lamps chiseling hour after hour in absolute silence. Why? What could be so important that you would spend decades carving rock only to vanish without a trace? Here's a quirky detail. Some of the walls bear markings that resemble fish carved deep and sharp. But these aren't decorative. They're minimal, symbolic, almost like brands. Some have proposed that these fish shapes might be markers, guides even. If so, then someone once knew how to navigate this subterranean maze. Perhaps these caves weren't meant to be entered freely. Perhaps they were meant to be hidden. Then, there's the legend, rare, hard to trace, but present in whispers, that speaks of an emperor's hidden archive. A vault of knowledge kept away from the surface, preserved in stone for a future age. That would explain the absence of fire damage, the consistent humidity levels, and the obsessive symmetry. But of course it could just be a story. And the caves remain silent. You look up and realize something else. There's no soot on the ceilings, in any of the caves, which leads to one of the most confounding mysteries. How were they lit during construction? If workers used torches, there should be burn marks. If they used mirrors, where are they? If they worked in darkness, how? You take a breath deeper than you meant to. The air is heavy but not stale. It almost feels preserved, like the cave is holding its breath with you. A few more steps and you reach the far end of the chamber. Here, the walls form a perfect corner, 90 degrees precise as a carpenter's square. You run your hand along it, and for a moment it feels warmer than the rest of the stone. Maybe it's your imagination, or maybe you've just brushed up against something ancient and still very much alive. Some believe the caves were meant to outlast civilization itself, a seed vault of stone, a refuge in the event of cataclysm, or a library of the unseen. But if that's true, where's the knowledge? And that might be the real trick. What if the caves are the knowledge? A code not written in language, but in angle, echo, and orientation. You wouldn't read them, you would experience them. And maybe, just maybe, you already are. You walk slowly back up the steps into the soft afternoon light. The fields around you buzz with the sound of cicadas, utterly unaware of the city that slumbers beneath their roots. You wonder not for the first time if something's still down there, watching, waiting, or maybe remembering. You're not entirely sure when the whispers began. Maybe it was the moment you stepped back out into the daylight, leaving the hush of the Longyu caves behind. Or maybe it's just the wind. But as you make your way northwest toward the high arid plateaus bordering Tibet, a new kind of silence sets in. Not the sacred stillness of temples or tombs, but the blank, eerie kind. The kind that feels edited, as though something was once spoken here, but then carefully erased. You're here to trace the strange legend of the Dropa stones, a mystery that dances between archaeology, Cold War intrigue, and sci-fi conspiracy. And if it wasn't so persistently strange, you might just laugh it off. But the more you listen, the more it echoes. Let's begin with the basics. In 1938, a Chinese archaeologist named Qipu Tei allegedly led an expedition into the Bayanhar Mountains, a remote range where local legends spoke of small, fragile beings who came from the stars. The team was exploring caves at high elevation when they reportedly discovered a series of tombs. tiny skeletons arranged in neat rows, buried in shallow graves. These skeletons weren't like anything the team had seen before. Their skulls were disproportionately large, their limbs spindly, and their height, according to the reports, barely over 4 feet. Alongside them were stone discs about a foot across, with a hole in the center, and spiral grooves etched along the surface like a record. These are what would come to be called the Dropa stones. Now, there are 2 versions of what happened next. The mainstream version says, the story ends there. Little evidence, no academic follow-up, and certainly no artifacts preserved. A fabrication, a hoax. Possibly propaganda from a time when East and West were locked in ideological warfare and strange stories made for effective disinformation. But the other version, the one whispered in late-night forums and buried footnotes, says otherwise. According to fringe researchers like Dr. Tsum Nui, a name that may or may not have been real, the spiral grooves were deciphered. They weren't just decorative, they were inscriptions. Tiny etched symbols that when translated told a story. A story of beings who crashed on Earth over 12,000 years ago. Stranded, lost, peaceful. They were called the Dropa, and they came from a planet near Sirius. Their craft malfunctioned, and they took refuge in the mountains where they lived alongside early humans. Some legends even say they taught farming astronomy and metallurgy. Historians still argue whether any of this was ever recorded or if it was an elaborate fabrication. The Chinese Academy of Sciences has no official documentation of such a discovery, and multiple museums denied having ever held the stones. Photos allegedly taken of the discs in the 1960s surfaced briefly in European magazines, only to disappear again. You pause on a rocky outcrop, imagining a line of small, fragile humanoids dragging a wrecked spacecraft through the snow. It sounds like fantasy. But then again, is it stranger than the terracotta army or an underground city carved by hand and silence? Let's step back, because the Dropa mystery may not be about aliens at all. What's rarely mentioned is that the region where these stones were supposedly found is also rich in ancient Qiang and Tibetan traditions, cultures that recorded myths of sky visitors often described not as gods, but as confused wanderers, not powerful, not divine, just different. And that's the part that sticks with you. These weren't conquerors or angels. They were crash survivors, strangers, vulnerable. That's a narrative you don't usually hear in ancient legends. Even the spiral design of the Dropa stones mirrors something seen elsewhere. Across China's southwest, particularly in the Dian culture, archaeologists have found jade discs, bronze medallions, and ceremonial mirrors, many featuring central holes and spiral motifs. Were the Dropa stones just variations of these, or were they misinterpreted? Ritual objects, tools of sound, or calendar tracking? Some researchers propose that the stones were acoustic instruments, resonators, that when spun or struck created harmonic tones. If true, they may have been used for healing meditation or communication. One researcher claimed that certain grooves emitted high-frequency vibrations when touched with quartz, a detail that was admittedly never independently verified. But the part of the legend that still chills you comes from a supposed carving inside one of the caves. A mural said to show small figures with domed helmets surrounded by falling stars. Beneath them, crude illustrations of a circular object descending onto jagged terrain. Of course, no one has found this mural since. You sit now on a flat stone watching the sun begin to lower behind the peaks. The air up here feels thinner. Everything is slower. If the Dropa ever did exist, this would have been the perfect place to disappear. Not into a spaceship, but into myth. The Dropa legend has its critics. Many historians classify it as Cold War pseudoscience, likely invented or exaggerated in Western Europe, then misattributed to China. No verified academic papers exist under the names of the researchers involved. The original stones have never been located in any Chinese museum. And yet, the story lingers. There's a psychological term, cryptomnesia, which means hidden memory. It's when you remember something, but don't realize you're remembering. You think it's new, original, but it's not. It was planted long ago, buried under thought, then retrieved without context. That's how the Dropa stones feel, like a memory the earth has tried to forget. And perhaps that's the most compelling part of the story. Not whether it's true in a scientific sense, but whether it's true in the way folklore becomes warning. Civilizations fall, visitors vanish, discs get buried, languages are lost, and the only evidence that remains is something round, grooved and whispering when the wind catches it just right. So you sit there a little longer listening for the wind, waiting maybe for a low whirring hum, but it doesn't come, not tonight. Still something feels imprinted, not in the sky, not in the stone, but in you. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your palms, and leave the Dropa behind. If they were ever here at all, they didn't come to rule. They came to hide, and maybe that's why they've never left. As the last golden light of day falls behind the Tibetan plateau, you head east again, this time toward the cradle of China's earliest legends. You're no longer following the stories of buried cities or ancient astronauts. Now you're chasing something more abstract, something that was once symbolic of ultimate authority, so sacred and so potent, it was believed to hold the fate of an entire empire. You're chasing the trail of the 9 tripod cauldrons, known in Chinese as the Ju Ding Ju Ding. You've probably never heard of them, but to the ancient Chinese, the 9 tripods weren't just ceremonial cookware or decoration. They were the soul of the state, the beating molten heart of legitimacy itself. According to legend, the tripods were cast by Yu the Great, the founder of the Xia dynasty, China's first and most mythical royal lineage. He supposedly forged them from the bronze tribute gathered from the 9 provinces he unified. Each tripod represented one of those provinces and was engraved with strange beasts, cosmic symbols, and magical inscriptions detailing the dangers and spirits of the land. Together, they symbolize the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. If you possessed the tripods, it meant you held China's destiny in your hands. But then, they vanished. Somewhere between the fall of the Zhou dynasty and the rise of the Qin Empire, the 9 tripod cauldrons disappeared. Not stolen, not destroyed, just gone. The records grow quiet, the sightings stop, and centuries of scholars have been left scratching their heads, wondering how the most important ritual objects in early Chinese history could simply cease to exist. Historians still argue whether they ever physically existed at all. Some believe they were purely symbolic. Others insist they were real, weighing thousands of pounds each, and were moved from capital to capital over the centuries, eventually sinking into the Yellow River, or being hidden in some secret tomb. In the spring and autumn period, multiple kings tried to claim them. One ruler reportedly asked a court astrologer whether he had enough virtue to possess the tripods. The reply, "The tripods will not be moved," which was a polite ancient way of saying, "No, buddy, you're not divine enough." You begin to feel their weight, not just the literal molten heft of ancient bronze, but the ideological pressure. These weren't objects, they were authority cast in metal. Think of them as a mystical combination of the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, and the nuclear football. Lose the tripods, and you risk losing your throne, or worse, the cosmic balance itself. And what makes them even stranger is how rarely they're depicted. There are almost no reliable ancient illustrations of the tripods, no temple paintings, no detailed texts describing their exact design, just cryptic references riddled with reverence that suggest the very act of describing them would be sacrilegious. You're in Luoyang, now one of China's ancient capitals, wandering the old riverbanks at dusk. This is where some believe the tripods were last seen. A few legends claim they were dropped into the Yellow River to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. Others say they were buried with the last ruler of the Xia dynasty, swallowed by mud and time. And then there's an odd pattern you notice every time an emperor tried to excavate them or claimed he had found them. Something catastrophic followed. A rebellion, a famine, an assassination. It's almost as if the tripods didn't want to be found. That's what fascinates you. They weren't just objects of worship. They were treated like living entities, spirits of bronze, and they always seemed to disappear when dynasties began to fall. So what if they weren't just cauldrons? What if they were keys? You start thinking about their design. Bronze, heavy, symbolic beasts engraved into them, possibly astronomical symbols, maps of constellations, or even geographic diagrams. One theory suggests that each tripod held encoded knowledge of one province, its resources, threats, seasonal patterns, and celestial connections. In other words, they were a data storage system, prehistoric hard drives. Some even believe the tripods emitted sound that, when struck correctly, they would ring in tones that could summon or repel spirits. There's a half-legend that during one invasion, a ruler struck the central tripod in a ritual, and a sound reverberated through the valleys, causing birds to fall from the sky. No, that's not in the official records, but it is in the folk songs. And here's a fringe theory that makes you pause. What if the tripods weren't cast by humans at all? What if they were cast for them? A few esoteric schools of thought suggest that the original Juding may have been gifted to Yu the Great by sky beings, not in the flying saucer sense, but in the mythical sense. Celestial instructors, star sages, sound far-fetched perhaps. But remember, Yu was said to control floods by talking to dragons and walking upstream with a magic compass. Mythology in ancient China wasn't decoration, it was instruction. You glance up at the stars now and suddenly wonder, were the tripods aligned with certain constellations? Were they meant to resonate with seasonal celestial events, like eclipses or solstices? And most tantalizing of all, what if they were part of a larger system? Some Taoist writings refer to the resonance of heaven and earth and hint that rulers must align the three treasures, heaven, earth, and humanity. Could the tripods have been tools for this alignment, not just ceremonial objects, but instruments of cosmic balance? You're not alone in that thought. In the Han Dynasty, the philosopher Dong Zhongshu declared that emperors should rule not by conquest, but by tuning themselves to the natural frequencies of the universe. He wasn't speaking metaphorically, he meant literally via ritual music and geometry. And suddenly, these old bronze cauldrons feel less like ancient cookware and more like circuit nodes in a spiritual machine. You turn toward the river one last time. Somewhere beneath its muddy depths, perhaps buried in silt or encased in stone, the tripods sleep. Maybe they were broken apart and melted down during one of China's endless wars. Or maybe they're still waiting for a ruler pure enough, balanced enough, harmonized enough to earn their presence again. And you wonder, if they were ever found today, what would happen? Would the heavens open? Would empires fall? Or would they simply ring once more and then fall silent? One thing's certain. When it comes to the 9 tripod cauldrons, the line between myth and matter is as thin as a bronze edge, and like all sacred objects, they don't need to be seen to be powerful. It's late now. The kind of late where the night no longer feels like an absence of sun, but a presence in itself, deep shadowed and watching. You move toward the Yangtze River, winding through lush hills until the lights of the modern world flicker out behind you. Up ahead, half lost in mist, looms a place that most maps don't mark clearly. The locals know it though. They don't go there, not unless they have to. Because this isn't just a place. It's Fengdu, known for over 2,000 years as the Ghost City. You step onto the path that leads up the hillside, and everything seems just a little too quiet. There are no birds, no insects, only old stone staircases disappearing into the fog and statues, hundreds of them, lining the way. Grinning, leering, judging. They've been here for centuries, guarding a city that exists halfway between this world and the next. Fengdu is unlike any other archaeological site in China. It isn't a ruin exactly, and it isn't a traditional city either. It's a myth made stone, a physical representation of Diyu, the Chinese underworld governed by King Yan, judge of the dead. But here's where things get weird. Fengdu didn't start as a symbolic construction. It was originally a real city established during the Han Dynasty around 2,000 years ago. It grew into a religious site over centuries, blending Taoist, Buddhist, and local folk beliefs into a sprawling necropolis where architecture mirrors the journey of the soul after death. You pass through a series of gates. Each one has a name like something from a dream or a warning. The Gate of the Ghost Realm, the Bridge of Helplessness, the Hall of Judgment. These aren't just poetic, they're instructional. Every structure here corresponds to a phase in the soul's transition after death. Some tourists walk this path for fun. You walk it with respect, because at night, even the concrete seems to remember. One of the most infamous sites is the Bridge of Helplessness, a narrow stone arch over a murky pond. According to legend, spirits must cross this bridge to reach the afterlife. But there's a test: the good pass easily. The wicked, they slip and fall. Local monks still perform rituals here, reenacting ancient ceremonies that once marked the Hun and Po, the two souls believed to dwell inside every person. One returns to the heavens. The other, more shadowy, wanders the earth or faces trial in the underworld. You glance over your shoulder, just in case. Historians still debate whether Fengdu is simply a religious art installation or something older. There are rumors that the site was built atop prehistoric tombs, that long before King Yan was imagined here, someone else claimed the mountain for burial. The oldest inscriptions found on site don't refer to spirits at all, but to strange deities, some with bird heads, some with multiple eyes. Local shamans claim these are not traditional Chinese gods, but older ones, forgotten ones. And the stonework is strange too. Many of the staircases are carved directly into the mountain's side, not laid, but sculpted whole. Some of the more delicate carvings, like those depicting the 10 courts of hell, are shockingly precise for their age. And in areas untouched by restoration, the wear patterns on the steps suggest thousands of years of use, far more than official records admit. There's even an old tale that during the Tang Dynasty, an entire battalion of soldiers marched into Fengdu one night and never came back out. No battle, no war, just disappeared. Which brings you to a less talked about theory that Fengdu isn't just a metaphor, it's a threshold. In Taoist cosmology, mountains are considered portals, places where the boundary between worlds grows thin. And Fengdu, perched halfway up Ming Mountain, is one of the few places where the landscape itself was shaped to mirror the spirit world. Some Taoist texts even claim that Fengdu sits atop a dragon vein, a convergence point of earthly and celestial energy. You reach the hall of the King of Hell, and it feels less like a building than a warning. The figures here are massive grinning demons with bulging eyes and elongated hands. Some hold scales, others hold whips. Behind them, the wall carvings depict punishments for souls being boiled in oil, crushed under mountains, or forced to climb thorn-covered trees. It's grim, but also precise. The entire journey is mapped out: what happens after death, what tests you face, what decisions you must answer for. But why build this physically? Why carve these visions into stone? Maybe because memory fades, but stone lasts. And if you can walk the afterlife even while alive, perhaps you'll return to this world a little wiser. Still, not everything here is religious. In one secluded corner, mostly forgotten by tourists, lies an abandoned shrine bearing an inscription not found in any modern guidebook. The characters are archaic, the translation rough, but it reads something like, "Beware the sky that moves. Beware the mouths that do not speak." No one knows what it means. In the late 1990s, there were plans to relocate parts of Fengdu due to rising waters from the Three Gorges Dam. But strange complications arose: construction accidents, equipment failure, workers who refused to continue. Eventually, the plans were scaled back. Some said the site should be left alone. You're not surprised. It's not just about ghosts. It's about memory, ancestral, spiritual, cosmic. Fengdu stands as a reminder that the line between this life and the next is thinner than we like to admit. That maybe we walk among the dead more often than we realize. And as you descend the mountain path, the statues no longer leer. They simply watch. One in particular seems different than before. Had its hand always been raised like that? You keep walking. You don't look back. The locals say no one leaves Fengdu unchanged. They might be right. By the time you leave Fengdu, your pace has slowed. Not from fatigue, but from something more ambient. A sense that the ground itself is older than time, and the past more present than it should be. You move northeast toward the center of China, where the Yellow River once carved its mark into early dynasties and distant lore. Here, among the brittle remains of ancient oracle temples and crumbling villages, lies one of the most peculiar riddles in Chinese archaeology, one that scholars recognize, but few truly understand. Tonight, you're brushing off the dust from the ancient oracle bones of China, and the scripts inscribed upon them that still defy full translation. Picture this. You crouch in a low chamber, the walls lined with boxes of fragile ox scapulae and turtle plastrons, the shoulder blades and undershells of animals. They aren't bones anymore. They're books etched in thin, straight, angular strokes. These are the earliest known examples of Chinese writing, dating back more than 200 years to the Shang dynasty. But there's a catch. We still can't read all of them. Oracle bones were used for divination. The process was complex and ritualistic. First questions were carved into the bone questions for the ancestors or the heavens, or sometimes the king himself. Then, heat was applied to the back of the bone until it cracked. The shape of the crack was interpreted by a priest or diviner. The outcome would then be carved next to the question. Sometimes even the result, what actually happened, was added later. So what kinds of questions were they asking? You might expect grand inquiries about fate and the cosmos. And yes, some of those appear. But many are astonishingly everyday. Will it rain on the seventh day? Should we sacrifice 3 pigs or 5? Will the king's toothache pass? There's something charming about it. Even the most powerful empire bronze ritual pageantry still had to worry about the weather and sore gums. But it's not the questions that puzzle modern scholars. It's the script itself. Out of the approximately 150,000 oracle bones discovered to date, only about 5,000 unique characters have been identified. And of those, only a portion, maybe 1/3, are clearly understood. The rest, unknown. Guesses. Or left blank in translations marked with ellipses and educated sighs. Historians still argue whether the unknown characters represent lost dialects, codes, or simply variations in handwriting across different diviners. Some bones show scripts that don't appear on any other records. Others feature diagrams, curves, circles, and lines that don't resemble writing at all. Were these experimental symbols, or something else entirely? You turn over a scapula gently. Its surface is aged to the color of tea, and the grooves are shallow but deliberate. You recognize a few characters, early forms of modern Chinese words for Sun King and ancestor. But then there's one that looks like a tree, with 2 mouths beneath it. That one's not in any dictionary. Some fringe researchers suggest these untranslatable scripts are not merely linguistic. They're mnemonic devices meant to trigger certain knowledge through visual patterns, like ancient flashcards for ceremonial memory. Others go further. One proposal, rarely mentioned in mainstream circles, posits that these bone inscriptions contain encoded star charts with each crack and mark corresponding to a specific night sky event. The same way Polynesian navigators once read ocean swells like sentences, these priests might have read the bones like celestial road maps. Could it be? After all, the Shang calendar system was remarkably accurate, and their rituals often aligned with solstices and lunar phases. Was the divination really for the ancestors, or was it astronomical prediction disguised as spiritual ceremony? You take a moment to consider how consistent the patterns are. Left side, right side, question, crack, outcome. It almost feels like data entry. One oracle bone in particular, often left out of public exhibitions, features a carving that doesn't ask a question at all. It simply states, "The wind will carry fire to the west." There's no date, no context, just that. Was it a prediction, a warning, or a record of a solar flare, a meteor, or some ancient catastrophe? We'll likely never know. And here's another wrinkle. Oracle bones weren't limited to the Shang capital. Similar artifacts have been found far afield in places where the Shang influence wasn't thought to have extended. Some of these outlying bones bear entirely different scripts, and one group even shows non-Chinese symbols, spirals, zigzags, and interlocked triangles that resemble symbols found on Neolithic pottery from thousands of years earlier. It raises a question few dare to ask: was Shang writing a sudden innovation, or an echo? What if Oracle bone script wasn't the beginning of Chinese literacy, but the end of something older? A simplification, a distillation of older, more complex visual systems, now lost, now incomprehensible. And what of the animals? The choice of ox and turtle wasn't random. Both were sacred animals. The ox for sacrifice, the turtle for longevity and cosmic balance. In Taoist texts, turtles represent the world's stability, its shell, the heavens, its body, the earth. Were the bones chosen for practical reasons, or were the scribes carving their questions directly into the body of the cosmos? There's a calm silence in the room as you consider that. You're not in a museum. You're in a data vault carved from bone-storing human hopes, fears, and secrets from a time when empires were still only prayers. And not all the questions have been answered. In fact, most haven't, because some bones, just a few found in a remote site, contain inscriptions that don't follow any known pattern. No divination cracks, no outcomes, just repeating phrases written backwards in mirrored characters. One of them repeats the same symbol 4 times, then stops abruptly. It's not translated. It's not in any catalog. But the archaeologist who found it said something odd in her notes. It feels like someone was trying to remember something, or trying to make sure we would. You place the bone gently back into its tray and close the lid. Tonight, the voices of the Shang whisper not through ghosts or phantoms, but through questions etched in bone. Questions we still don't know how to ask, or maybe questions we're not ready to hear the answers to. And until we are, the bones will wait, quietly, patiently, the way memory always does. By now, you've seen tombs carved into stone bones, carved into prophecy, and cities carved into myths. But tonight, you're stepping into a story that isn't carved at all. It's painted, woven, folded in silk, and sealed in lacquer. This time, you're headed into the quiet chambers of one of China's most haunting archaeological marvels, the Mawangdui tomb. You've probably never heard of it. It doesn't have the scale of the Great Wall or the fame of the Terracotta Army. But what waits inside this tomb might be stranger and far more intimate. You arrive at the site just outside Changsha, where the Mawangdui excavation stunned the world in the 1970s. 3 tombs, perfectly preserved, sealed beneath layers of white clay and charcoal. They belong to a noble Han family, buried over 2,000 years ago. But it's not the artifacts that make this site extraordinary. It's what's wrapped in silk and lying in the innermost coffin of tomb number 1. Her name is Lady Dai, or more formally, Xin Jue, the Marquise of Dai, and she's waiting for you still. Most mummies are skeletal, dried, a whisper of life at best, but not her. Lady Di's body was so perfectly preserved that when her coffin was opened, her skin was still soft to the touch. Her veins still held blood, her joints still bent at the elbows and knees. Even her internal organs, liver, lungs, stomach, were intact enough for a full autopsy. Doctors concluded she died of a heart attack brought on by obesity, high blood pressure, and a rich diet. In a way, she became the world's oldest documented case of heart disease. But here's the mystery: we don't know how she was preserved. Historians still argue whether the preservation was due to the tomb's design, the unknown fluid found in her coffin, or a combination of environmental and ritual factors. The fluid, pale yellow and slightly acidic, has never been fully identified. It doesn't match any embalming substance known to science, ancient or modern. And her tomb itself was constructed like a layered puzzle box. 4 nested coffins, airtight seals, dozens of silk layers, a charcoal layer 3 feet thick, topped by white clay to repel moisture. It's like someone knew exactly how to make time stop. But the deeper mystery isn't her preservation, it's what she was buried with. There are silk maps tucked beside her body, some of the oldest in existence. They depict the known world as it was over 2,000 years ago, and yet they feature regions that weren't supposed to be charted until centuries later. Mountain ranges, river systems, even islands. One shows what appears to be the Yellow Sea, with shockingly accurate coastlines. One map isn't even terrestrial, it's celestial. An ancient star chart painted in black and crimson ink, plotting the movements of the heavens. The stars are arranged not by Western zodiac, but by Chinese constellations, many of which correspond to celestial events and seasonal rituals. Some scholars think it was designed to guide Lady Di's soul through the afterlife. Others think it was a manual for celestial navigation, or perhaps for timing certain Taoist alchemical rituals. Among the objects found with her were lacquered boxes containing everything from cosmetics and combs to musical instruments and surgical tools. One small silk book contained breathing exercises, early forms of Qigong. Another describes dietary recommendations for immortality: eat pine resin, drink dew, avoid grains. There's also an invisible thread running through her tomb, one of transition, because Lady Di was buried during a time when Taoism, Confucianism, and folk religion were colliding. The artifacts found in her tomb reflect this fusion: Confucian funerary rites, Taoist cosmology, shamanistic symbols. Her burial isn't just a goodbye, it's a philosophical statement. One detail that often gets overlooked: her clothing, multiple layers of hand-stitched silk robes still shimmering after 2,000 years. One robe is woven so finely that it weighs only 49 grams, less than a slice of bread. The craftsmanship defies logic, or at the very least, modern replication. And here's something few tourists hear about. On one of the wall hangings found near her coffin, a long vertical silk painting shows Lady Di ascending to the heavens, guided by mysterious figures. Some wear bird masks, others have elongated limbs. It's not clear if they're ancestors' spirits or something else entirely. You lean in, squinting at the fine brushwork. One of the figures holds a disc, a round glowing object, with rays painted in gold leaf. Some interpret it as a sun symbol. Others think it's a representation of the Tao. A few quietly wonder if it's something more technological. Fringe theorists suggest that Mawang Dui was not just a noble tomb, but a ritual chamber for consciousness transfer, a place where Lady Di's mind was meant to survive her body. The breathing manuals, the dietary scrolls, the star maps, all pieces of a forgotten science of immortality. Far-fetched maybe. But consider this: in Han cosmology, the soul was divided into parts: the Hun, which ascended, and the Po, which lingered. The rituals around death weren't just about peace. They were about preserving personality essence awareness. Not metaphorically, literally. Some of the scholars who handled her remains in the 1970s reported feeling strange, dreamlike, as if they were being watched. One even claimed that days after working on the autopsy, he dreamed of a woman in silk robes pointing at the moon and whispering numbers in a dialect he didn't recognize. There's no footnote for that in the excavation report. Lady Di now rests in a modern glass case behind museum barriers and climate control. Her skin is darker now, the preservation fading with each passing year. But something lingers. You imagine the moment she was sealed in that tomb. Candles flickering chants echoing off lacquered walls, the silk map laid beside her like a passport. They weren't just preserving her body, they were sending her somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, she made it. You leave the tomb slowly, not wanting to turn your back. The air outside feels cooler now, the sky deeper, and the silence. It feels like silk. You head north now toward the plains that once trembled beneath the hooves of ancient cavalry and the feet of millions who lived, worked and worshipped under dynasties long gone. This stretch of land is no stranger to upheaval, political, geological, even spiritual. And buried deep within it lies something that once shook the very earth with no sound at all, a machine that shouldn't exist. You're about to meet Zhang Heng's earthquake detector, or as some call it, the world's first seismoscope. It's not a secret exactly. Every Chinese schoolchild learns about Zhang Heng, astronomer, inventor, poet, and polymath of the Eastern Han dynasty. But very few grasp the full strangeness of what he built. Fewer still have seen its replica, and fewer yet know just how mysterious it truly is. You step into a quiet museum where a bronze vessel sits quietly behind glass. At first glance, it looks ceremonial, something you'd use in a temple to hold incense or ritual wine. It's round, ornately engraved with dragon heads sticking out from 8 sides, like spokes on a cosmic wheel. Beneath each dragon's open mouth is a toad sitting patiently, as if waiting for something to fall. And fall something did. According to historical records, in the year 132 CE, Zhang Heng presented this device to the Han court. It didn't measure tremors or draw seismographic lines. It did something far more poetic. It predicted the direction of distant earthquakes by releasing a small bronze ball from the mouth of one of the dragons, which then dropped into the waiting toad's mouth below. No wires, no electronics, no magic. Just an intricate internal system of rods and pendulums. One day the device released a ball north-facing. No one in the capital felt anything. But days later, a messenger arrived. A powerful earthquake had struck in the north. Zhang's device had recorded it first. Historians still argue whether the story is real or just a well-polished legend. No original models survive. The design we have today is based on ancient descriptions pieced together through conjecture and reconstruction. The exact internal mechanism remains unknown. So let's pause here. Imagine it, a bronze jar standing silently in the imperial court, somehow able to detect a tremor hundreds of miles away, and not just detect it, but determine its direction. How? Some scholars theorize it was essentially a pendulum-based trigger, sensitive to certain seismic waves. But even modern engineers have trouble replicating it with that level of directional accuracy. Others think the mechanism used a kind of floating element suspended in fluid, activated by directional force. But then why bronze? Why dragons and toads? And here's where it gets more peculiar. Ancient Chinese cosmology didn't separate science from symbolism. The 8 directions on the seismoscope weren't just compass points, they corresponded to Bagua, the 8 trigrams of Taoist metaphysics. Each dragon head wasn't random. It aligned with cosmic energy flow, spiritual resonance, and elemental theory. This was a scientific tool, designed like a ritual object. That duality is something modern minds often skip over. We like our science separate from our myth. But in Zhang Heng's time, they were 2 sides of the same scroll. Earthquakes weren't just geological events. They were celestial warning signs that the balance between heaven and earth had been disturbed. The emperor was expected to restore harmony. Tools like the seismoscope were instruments of political legitimacy as much as technological advancement. Zhang Heng himself wasn't just an inventor. He was an astronomer who mapped the stars with such precision that later scholars suspected he had access to data beyond his time. His water clocks were among the most accurate of the ancient world. His calculations of pi rivaled those of Archimedes, and yet this one device, the earthquake detector, is what has endured most vividly. Why? Maybe because it's so eerily modern. Or maybe because it hints at knowledge we don't fully understand. You lean in, staring at the dragons, each one unique, each one silent. Some say the internal ball was suspended inside a floating pendulum, reacting to the S-waves of a quake. Others claim there were internal levers, reacting differently depending on the vector of force. But no design ever fully explains how it could detect distant quakes with directional accuracy. Not without modern sensors, not without amplification. Unless, of course, the key lies not in force, but in resonance. That's one theory. That the seismoscope was less a detector of movement and more a receiver of frequency. That it resonated with specific low-frequency waves moving through the Earth, an idea that touches not just on physics, but on metaphysical principles in Taoist thought. Because in ancient China, everything vibrated with qi life force. Earthquakes weren't breaks in stone. They were shifts in cosmic qi. Zhang Heng's machine then wasn't reading the Earth as mass. It was reading it as vibration, as music. There's even a fringe hypothesis that the toads weren't just cute accessories. They were acoustic cavities tuned to specific tones. That when a tremor occurred, the whole apparatus didn't just move, it sang. Too strange, maybe. But one thing's certain, no modern replica has ever fully matched the descriptions in the ancient texts. Something is always off. Too sensitive. Not sensitive enough. Unreliable. It's almost as if Zhang Heng had a component we've lost some forgotten insight into wave propagation material, harmonics, or structural balance. And then, there's this: shortly after presenting the seismoscope, Zhang Heng quietly published a star catalog documenting celestial events he claimed would predict earthquakes in advance. That document, unlike the seismoscope, has vanished. Some say it was destroyed in a fire. Others whisper that it was sealed away during a palace purge. But whatever it contained, Zhang Heng seemed convinced that the movements of the heavens could foretell the shudders of the earth. So you stand there watching the replica. It doesn't move. It never will. But in your mind, you can hear the faint clink of bronze against bronze. A dragon's mouth opens. A ball falls. A toad waits. And somewhere far away the ground shifts just a little. You realize then this wasn't just a machine. It was a philosophy in bronze. A reminder that the earth speaks, that balance matters, that science and spirit can dance in the same circle, and that sometimes the smartest minds in history didn't need electricity to hear the voice of the world. They just needed to listen. You've walked among warriors, ghosts, tombs, and tremors. But tonight, you're headed into flame. Not literal fire, but something even more dangerous, the deliberate erasure of knowledge. You make your way to Xianyang, the ancient capital of the Qin dynasty, once a shining jewel of unification infrastructure and law. But beneath its gleaming legacy lies a shadow, a fire that burned books and buried scholars. A moment in time when truth became treason. They call it the burning of the books and the burying of the scholars. And it's not just a cautionary tale, it's one of the earliest recorded examples of state-sponsored censorship. Let's set the stage. It's 213 BCE, and Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, has recently unified the warring states. For the first time in centuries, China is one. Roads are standardized. The written language is made uniform. Even the axle widths of carts are regulated. It sounds efficient, orderly, and it was. But unity in the emperor's eyes also meant control, not just of territory or taxes, but of thought. In his court, advisors debated how to manage dissent. The legalist philosophy that underpinned Qin governance emphasized law punishment and strict hierarchy. It saw history and ideology as threats, dangerous tools that could be used to stir rebellion or question authority. And so the emperor made a decision that would echo for millennia: burn the past. He issued an edict all books not related to agriculture, medicine, or the Qin state's official doctrine were to be destroyed. That meant Confucian texts, historical records, philosophical writings, even poetry, all consigned to flames. Knowledge once passed down by brush and scroll turned to smoke and ash. Historians still argue whether the burning was as widespread as described in later accounts. Some think it's exaggerated, a dramatic metaphor for intellectual suppression. Others insist it was meticulously enforced, especially among the nobility and scholars who were considered most subversive. Either way, the consequences were clear. But the story doesn't end there, because not long after the fires died down, another edict followed, one far darker. It's said that 460 Confucian scholars were accused of spreading dissent. Some had spoken out against the book burnings. Others simply carried forbidden scrolls or whispered heretical ideas in tea houses. They were arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. But not quick death. They were buried alive. The records describe pits dug outside the capital, scholars lined up, their scrolls stripped from their hands, and the earth, once the cradle of thought, became their tomb. Now here's where things become even more unsettling. While mainstream historians attribute the massacre to political paranoia and the consolidation of power, some fringe researchers suggest another motive, something far stranger. A few believe the buried scholars weren't merely critics. They were guardians of knowledge, carriers of forbidden history, the kind that didn't align with the new regime's version of reality. One legend claims they were protectors of pre-Qin cosmology, which included maps of the stars and cyclical histories that implied other ages of humanity had risen and fallen before the Qin dynasty ever existed. Another theory, that the book burning wasn't about control, but containment, that some of the destroyed scrolls held descriptions of technologies, devices, or rituals that dated back to earlier unknown civilizations. Stories of mechanical dragons, sun-powered chariots, and floating palaces. The kind of stories that Qin Shi Huang, obsessed with immortality and power, might have feared could be turned against him. It sounds like myth, and yet, archaeologists working near Xianyang in the early 2000s uncovered a chamber that had once housed ancient scrolls, now carbonized, their characters unreadable. But among the debris was something strange, a bronze object shaped like a sphere with small notches along its equator. Some speculated it might have been part of an astrolabe. Others thought it was simply ornamental, but it wasn't logged in the official excavation report. One of the workers kept a fragment. It bore 3 characters: sky, change, return, a poetic phrase, or a warning. You take a deep breath, trying to imagine what it must have felt like in the imperial court as flames licked the edges of bamboo slips and silk scrolls. Knowledge going dark, history erased, not because it was false, but because it was inconvenient. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was vacancy. And in that absence, the emperor filled the air with edicts, statues, and monuments, none of which dared to question. But memory is stubborn. Some scrolls survived hidden in walls, buried under floorboards, passed down orally. The Confucian classics, once ash, re-emerged generations later. But many works were lost forever, vanished from the timeline like stars extinguished before we ever saw their light. And the scholars, their names are gone. No memorial, no tombstone. Just a whisper in official histories and a warning embedded in Chinese culture. Ever since that truth without power is fragile, and power without truth is dangerous. One curious irony, Qin Shi Huang sought immortality, spent fortunes on potions and elixirs. But today, He is remembered less for eternal life and more for this moment when he tried to make time forget and failed. You step out of the museum, the city around you buzzing with light and motion. But for a moment, you pause at the edge of a small park. Just dirt and stone. Children play nearby. No sign or marker. But this, they say, is where the earth opened and swallowed thought. You kneel briefly. The ground is cool, quiet, but not silent. Because stories don't stay buried. And ink even burned leaves a stain. You've seen tombs that outlived their builders' machines, that whispered the earth's tremors, and scrolls that nearly vanished into silence. But what if there were places that never really existed in the first place? Or places that exist only to the ones who believe. Now you head toward the coast, where the mountains meet the sea, and reality begins to blur into myth. Tonight, you sail in search of Penglai Island, the fabled realm of immortals. In ancient Chinese mythology, Penglai isn't just an island. It's a dream made physical. A floating paradise said to lie somewhere in the eastern seas, unreachable by ordinary means. It appears in the records of the Zhou dynasty, in the epics of poets, and in the increasingly desperate search logs of emperors who longed to escape death. Penglai was one of 5 sacred islands said to drift across the Bohai Sea, tethered to the world by invisible cords. On it grew trees of gold and silver. Rice bowls refilled themselves. Wine never soured. Beasts of jade roamed the hills. And most notably, 8 immortals, each a master of spiritual alchemy, lived there in eternal youth. You walk now along the modern coastline of Shandong province looking east. Nothing but dark water. But long ago, envoys were dispatched from this very spot, bearing ships filled with offerings, silk jade, and promises. Their mission to find Penglai, to bring back the elixir of life. Most never returned, and yet the stories grew louder. Perhaps the most famous seeker was Qin Shi Huang, the very emperor who once burned books in the name of order. Ironically, he was obsessed with achieving immortality, so much so that he sent entire expeditions in search of Penglai. One was led by a man named Shu Fu, a court sorcerer and alchemist. According to legend, Shu Fu set sail with thousands of young men and women said to be pure in spirit. His ships carried seeds, tools, and hopes. Some say they reached Japan. Others say they vanished into mist. Shu Fu never came back, but myths say he found the island and chose to stay. Historians still argue whether Shu Fu's voyage was real. Some Chinese texts describe his departure in detailed dates, supplies, coordinates. Yet there's no definitive proof of where he landed. Japanese folklore holds that a mysterious sage arrived from the sea during that same era, teaching agriculture and medicine. Could this be Shu Fu? Could Penglai be more metaphor than map? But then, why do so many ancient charts attempt to place it? You glance at a Han Dynasty map preserved on silk. Just off the northeastern coast, near the Korean peninsula, a small island is marked not labeled Penglai, but surrounded by symbols of cloud stars and what appears to be a rising tower. In the Taoist tradition, islands like Penglai weren't merely distant, they were interdimensional. Realms accessed only through spiritual readiness or divine permission. Some sects taught that Penglai shifted locations with the tides of Qi, that it could not be reached by compass or sail, but by transformation of the self. And this is where the story gets weirder. In the Zhenren Scrolls texts associated with high-level Taoist initiates, there are descriptions of stepping through the jade mist, a ritual process involving fasting meditation and prolonged exposure to mercury vapors. It was said that if one's soul became light enough, it could detach and find Penglai. The idea isn't entirely unfamiliar. Many cultures have tales of otherworldly islands, Avalon High Brazil tier, Nanog, each promising eternal life, unreachable by normal means. Penglai fits this archetype. But in Chinese lore, it was more than legend. It was policy. The Emperor Wu of Han reportedly built replica palaces based on descriptions of Penglai. His obsession with immortality shaped trade architecture, even astronomy. Entire sectors of society were dedicated to finding or recreating the island. And then there's the strange matter of the Penglai mushrooms. In certain Taoist texts, there are references to glowing fungi that bloom only on Penglai's shores, described as soft blue-white and humming gently at night. They were said to be ingredients in the legendary elixir of life. No such fungus exists today in any known taxonomy, but one archaeological dig in Fujian uncovered a lacquered box containing dried plant material and an inscription, "Gift for the King Immortality Leaf Penglai Origin." Tests were inconclusive. Skeptics argue that Penglai was never a real place, just a metaphor for transcendence. A kind of spiritual North Star for seekers who needed something to chase. But others point to odd maritime logs, including one by a Ming Dynasty sailor who claimed to see an island of white mist where no birds flew, surrounded by water that seemed thicker than the ocean. Fringe theorists go further, of course. One theory suggests Penglai was actually an ancient advanced civilization, possibly predating even known Chinese dynasties. A civilization that had harnessed some form of bioengineering or atmospheric manipulation, and whose survivors became the basis for the immortal legends. Another theory claims that Penglai was never in the sea at all, but in the sky. That it was a satellite or aerial city misinterpreted by early observers who saw lights and motion above the eastern horizon. Too far-fetched, perhaps. But the fact remains, Penglai lives on not just in stories, but in maps, carvings, imperial logs, and the quiet yearning of every person who's ever wanted just a little more time. And isn't that the real power of a place like this? You sit now on a worn stone outcrop facing the sea. The wind is cool, the waves consistent, and you wonder what if on a certain night, with the right moon and a quiet heart, the mist parted. Just enough. Would you see it? Would you recognize the towers of jade, the glowing trees, the immortals playing their silver flutes? Would you board the ship, or would you stay on shore scribbling notes and folding maps, convinced the real journey is still just beyond the horizon? Either way, Penglai doesn't mind. It waits, patiently, silently, because whether it's real or not, it has already won. It lives inside us. By now, you've stepped across realms both buried and imagined, where bones told fortunes and islands promised forever. But tonight's journey takes you back underground. Not to a tomb, but to something larger. A puzzle of architecture, engineering, and eerie silence. It lies beneath the city of Luoyang, once one of the most glorious capitals of imperial China. Here, under layers of bustling city streets and the dust of centuries, rests an underground labyrinth of ancient tombs and corridors collectively referred to as Luoyang's underground city. And no one quite agrees on why it was built the way it was. You begin your descent through a dimly lit stairwell, your footsteps echoing off the brick and stone. The temperature drops. The air grows still. You're no longer in a modern world. You've slipped into one of those strange folds of time where empires whisper from the walls. The Luoyang underground complex spans hundreds of tombs, most dating from the Han to Tang dynasties, roughly 2,000 to 1,300 years ago. Some are shallow family vaults, others are multi-room chambers with intricate carvings, murals, and trapdoors. But that's just the beginning. Archaeologists mapping the region noticed something odd. Many of the tombs were connected by tunnels. Long, narrow, deliberately constructed. Not just accidental passages caused by collapse or looters, but engineered links. Some corridors span dozens of meters. Others veer off into dead ends, or worse, nowhere. A few even spiral downward before simply stopping, as though their builders were interrupted halfway through a secret. So what was the purpose? Historians still argue whether the tunnels were practical, spiritual, or symbolic. One school of thought suggests they allowed families to visit their ancestors from nearby tombs, creating a kind of community of the dead. Another theory proposes they were emergency escape routes for the living, perhaps during times of civil unrest or invasion. But here's the part that sends a chill down your spine. Several of these tunnels are too small for a human adult to comfortably pass through, barely shoulder width, sloped at odd angles, and yet their craftsmanship is meticulous. Who used them? Why build a passage no one could walk? Some scholars believe they were for spiritual travel routes, intended not for the body, but for the soul. Taoist and Buddhist beliefs both include the idea of the soul's journey after death. These cramped spiraling shafts may have symbolized reincarnation paths or the movement between dimensions. One mural in particular, found in a high-status tomb, depicts what looks like a procession of spirits, heads bowed, hands extended, walking into a tunnel flanked by lanterns. Except the lanterns aren't typical Chinese designs. They're shaped like orbs, some with small tendrils trailing behind like comets or jellyfish. Is it a metaphor? A hallucination? Or was this mural capturing something once believed and now forgotten? In one sealed chamber, archaeologists found something even stranger, a compass-like stone dial embedded in the floor. It had 8 arms, each pointing to one of the tunnels. When aligned with the tomb's entry passage, the arms corresponded to astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, and certain star rises. This wasn't just a burial site, it was an observatory, a cosmic map buried underground. Why? Some theorists believe it was designed to allow the soul to travel in sync with the stars, each tunnel a celestial highway. Others say the tombs were part of a greater underground city, built in mirror to the capital above. A reflection, a safeguard, a place to preserve power in the event that surface society collapsed. Too speculative, perhaps. But then there's the inscription. Carved into a lintel above one tunnel mouth are the characters, "Return below when the heavens fall." What does that mean? One fringe interpretation claims it was a disaster bunker, a prophecy storage site built not for spiritual travel, but for survival. In this theory, select members of society were meant to descend into these tunnels during a cosmic or environmental catastrophe, preserving knowledge and culture. And here's where things get even more chilling. In one chamber, explorers found several miniature models of Luoyang's city grid, cast in bronze and jade. They were perfectly accurate, down to roads, bridges, and temple locations. But then, in a sealed alcove, they found a different model, one that didn't match any known city. It was Luoyang, but not Luoyang. Some temples were missing, others were added. New roads, an enormous circular structure in the center that no record has ever mentioned. Was it an idealized vision of the city? A plan for rebuilding after destruction? Or a memory of an earlier version of Luoyang, one now buried beneath the one we know? This double city theory has gained traction in recent years, especially as ground-penetrating radar surveys suggest multiple architectural layers beneath the current historical record. There may be even older ruins beneath the known tombs, some that haven't been excavated, and some that, according to officials, won't be. Why? Some say it's due to the presence of groundwater, making excavation unsafe. Others suggest political sensitivity, that whatever lies below could challenge long-held narratives about the origins of Chinese civilization. One official archaeologist who asked not to be named once said Luoyang is full of ghosts, not spirits, ghosts of information, of structures that aren't supposed to exist. And that brings you to the last chamber on your tour. It's unremarkable at first. Brick walls, empty niches. But as you turn to leave, your flashlight catches something etched into the corner, a phrase barely visible. Translated, it reads, "What we build above will fall. What we build below will remain." You let the light linger. Maybe that's what this whole place is. A message. Not just from the past to the present, but from the present to the future. A time capsule disguised as burial. A whisper that says, if the world above collapses, Follow the tunnels. Follow the stars. And remember, you've wandered beneath stone and spirit, decoding the hidden roads of the underworld. But now it's time to look up, not at walls or ceilings, but toward the stars themselves. Not in wonder, but in suspicion. Because tonight, you're tracing your fingers over ancient Chinese star maps charts, so old, so precise, and so strangely accurate that modern astronomers still puzzle over them. And you're left wondering, how did they know so much? In the West, when we think of early astronomy, we imagine the Babylonians, the Greeks, maybe the Egyptians. But China's stargazers were just as ambitious, perhaps more so. By the Warring States period, over 2,300 years ago, Chinese scholars were already tracking the motions of celestial bodies, recording eclipses, and assigning stars to constellations that bore deep symbolic meanings. The most famous surviving map is the Dunhuang star chart, dated to around the 7th century CE. It's painted on silk over 6 feet long and contains nearly 1/400 stars. But it wasn't the first, and that's where things get curious. Older fragments, some dating back over 2,000 years, suggest a tradition of stargazing that was far more advanced than we once believed. In fact, many of the constellations noted in Chinese texts match not only their positions in the sky, but their actual brightness and motion patterns. This isn't casual astrology, this is data. But here's where it starts to feel off. One recovered silk scroll, carbon dated to around 200 BCE, maps the movements of the 5 visible planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, over a span of decades. The predictions it contains line up shockingly well with modern calculations, and yet, these observations would have required tools we don't think they had. Not just keen eyes, but long-term record-keeping, a way of tracking planetary retrograde, and an understanding of the elliptical nature of orbits. Historians still argue whether these maps were created purely through observation, or if they suggest some form of mathematical modeling lost to time. One fringe theory goes further, suggesting that ancient Chinese astronomers might have inherited knowledge from a previous civilization, one that perished during an earlier cataclysm, and whose records were partially preserved in oral traditions and cryptic diagrams. Sound implausible? Maybe. But consider this one chart excavated near Anyang contains not just stars and planets, but a grid. A rectangular coordinate system complete with angular measurements. It seems to show the night sky as seen from a specific latitude and one that doesn't match Anyang's. So where was it drawn from? No one knows. Some suggest it was symbolic. Others believe it reflects observations made far to the south, possibly even as far as India or the South Pacific regions, that Chinese explorers wouldn't officially reach for centuries. And there's the matter of the celestial pole. The ancient Chinese identified a rotating sky, one that moved around the star, now known as Polaris. But during the Han Dynasty, Polaris wasn't actually the closest visible star to the North Celestial Pole. That honor belonged to Kochab, or Thuban. Yet ancient Chinese texts already emphasized Polaris as a pivot of the heavens, as if they knew it would become the pole star again in the future due to the Earth's axial precession. That's not superstition, that's long-term astronomical forecasting. But perhaps the strangest element of all lies in the Ziwei Dipper, a group of stars used in imperial astrology. According to one scroll found in Luoyang, each star in the Dipper was linked to a specific organ of the emperor's body, and changes in their brightness were interpreted as omens of health or illness. It sounds like myth, until you realize that the texts also track variations in stellar magnitude, some of which align with real astronomical events like novae or the periodic dimming of variable stars. How could they see that naked eye observation? Or something else? In the Tang Dynasty, the Imperial Astronomical Bureau maintained enormous star towers. These weren't telescopes as we know them, but they were tall platforms designed to eliminate horizon interference. From these heights, observers made notes each night, carefully carving records into bamboo slips and lacquered logs. Some entries describe wandering stars that pulse, possibly comets or novae. Others mention skylights that return every few centuries, sparking modern speculation that these might be early references to Halley's Comet or even unidentified periodic phenomena. One record from 675 CE found in the Imperial Archives describes a sky flare that turned night to silver and cast shadows like midday. That event has no Western equivalent. No European chronicle mentions it. No Arab scholar records it. And yet, it's noted with a date, time, and direction. What did they see? Was it a supernova? An atmospheric phenomenon? A solar reflection off an object we've long forgotten? Or was it something else entirely? A growing number of researchers now explore the idea that ancient star charts weren't just navigational tools. They were spiritual diagrams meant to help souls ascend through celestial gates. In this view, each star represents not just a body of light, but a trial, a guardian, a coordinate in the multidimensional map of the afterlife. In some Taoist temples, you'll find star altars, raised platforms, engraved with constellations used in ceremonies to align the initiate's body with the heavens. The ritual lie down, arms at your sides, head aligned with Polaris. Breathe. Visualize ascent. It's not just astronomy, it's sympathetic cosmology. You imagine it now, an ancient stargazer standing on a tower of red brick and stone brush, in hand mapping the slow arc of Mars. Not for war, not for math, but to understand his place in the pattern. That was always the Chinese way to see heaven and earth, not as separate, but as mirrors. The human body reflected the stars. The state echoed the sky. The emperor ruled not by decree, but by alignment with the cosmos. And when that alignment slipped, the stars would dim, the charts would tremble, and someone would begin drawing new ones. You followed lines of light across silk scrolls and palace ceilings, but now you find yourself drifting upward into the sky itself, though not as a stargazer. Tonight, you're chasing floating towers, not temples, not clouds, but architectural wonders said to drift through the heavens like ships on windless seas. You're entering the myth of China's floating towers, the so-called cloud cities of ancient mythology. At first glance, this sounds like the realm of fairy tales. Structures suspended in the air, hovering above mountaintops, unreachable by mortal hands. But as you dig into the texts, a pattern begins to emerge, one that repeats across centuries, dynasties, and even religions. The earliest references appear in Shanhai Jing, or the Classic of Mountains and Seas, a strange compendium of geography, myth, and natural wonders compiled over 2,000 years ago. Within its pages lies a description of a tower of light suspended above Mount Kunlun, said to gleam at night and drift slowly with the stars. Later, during the Tang dynasty, poets like Li Bai would write of jade towers floating in the eastern sky, glimpsed only by travelers who walked alone at twilight. Taoist texts describe similar visions, celestial palaces inhabited by immortals, suspended above clouds, and accessed only through dreams, trance, or divine favor. So what were these towers? Historians still argue whether they were metaphors, hallucinations, or genuine beliefs in a parallel sky realm. But here's where the myth becomes curious. The descriptions of the towers are remarkably consistent across unrelated sources, and sometimes oddly technical. A fragmentary scroll from the Han Dynasty, now housed in a private collection, contains what appears to be a floor plan labeled not in architectural terms, but in star names. It depicts a vertical structure with layered platforms, each labeled with references to seasons, elements, and directions. At the top, the character for Gate of Heaven. You pause to consider it. Could it be symbolic, perhaps? But some modern researchers have pointed out the resemblance to launch towers, vertical platforms layered with system steps compartments. Of course, there were no rockets in the Han Dynasty. Or were there? One fringe theory claims that these floating towers were misremembered technology, perhaps from a civilization lost in prehistory. Survivors. The theory says encoded memory into myth. Over time, reality dissolved into symbolism. The towers became metaphors. Their true nature, forgotten. It's speculative, but not unprecedented. In many mythologies, memories of natural disasters, technologies, or cataclysmic events become encoded in religious imagery. The Tower of Babel, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, even the chariots of Ezekiel, all are seen by some as symbolic retellings of forgotten science. In Chinese lore, the towers are sometimes associated with immortal cities, such as Yaochi, the Jade Lake Paradise of the Queen Mother of the West. These cities were said to descend to Earth on special nights, appearing above sacred mountains like holograms. In Taoist art, they are drawn with impossibly steep spires, adorned with flame-like motifs, and wheels beneath their foundations. Wheels on a floating tower. It gets weirder. An obscure Song Dynasty chronicle mentions a celestial house with burning eyes beneath spotted above the eastern sea during a summer festival. It describes light streaming down like a spider's thread of fire and a deep hum that turned the hearts of listeners upside down. Could that be Aurora Borealis, ball lightning, a meteor? Possibly. But then, there's the matter of Yunlu, literally cloud towers. A real architectural style dating back to the Jin and Tang dynasties. These were multi-level watchtowers, built with open terraces designed to overlook foggy valleys. But some records claim that Yunlu weren't just for watching. They were for contact. Contact with what? That's where you enter the realm of ritual transmission. High priests and sky shamans, especially among early Taoist sects, would climb these towers to meditate fast and observe the stars. Many believed the higher the elevation, the thinner the veil between heaven and earth. One priest, Master Xuanzhao, wrote in his final scroll, "I walked 3 nights without eating, and the tower lifted from beneath me. I saw the lines of qi running like rivers through the sky, and I spoke with men of silver speech and no breath." Delirium, poetic exaggeration, maybe. But consider this. Across the world from the Andes to Tibet, there are myths of floating cities, sky palaces, or hovering fortresses. In Bolivia, the Inca spoke of Tampu Taco, a city of 3 windows that once floated above Lake Titicaca. In Tibet, the concept of Shambhala includes cities that can only be accessed when one's vibration matches the realm. So is China's floating tower myth part of the same global pattern? There's one more detail. In 2015, a bizarre phenomenon occurred in Foshan, China. Several residents claimed to see what looked like a floating city in the sky, complete with towers, spires, and walls. The event was caught on video. Scientists called it a fata morgana, a form of optical illusion caused by atmospheric conditions bending light. The explanation is plausible, but why did it match so closely the ancient illustrations? Coincidence? Or is our sky more reflective than we think? The floating towers may never have been built of stone or steel. Maybe they were never meant to be physical at all. Perhaps they were models of aspiration visions of what could be or what once was. You sit now on a hillside beneath the stars. The clouds drift slowly above, glowing silver in the moonlight. For a moment, the mist gathers in a shape just barely a spire, a rim, a parapet. And then it's gone. You blink. Was it real? Or have you been up here too long? One thing's for certain. Whether they hovered in the sky or the mind, China's floating towers remind us of something crucial. That civilization doesn't just build outward with roads and walls and laws. It also builds upward with dream symbols and stories. And sometimes those stories float. You've wandered through drifting cities and stars that pulse with memory, but now you're turning back towards something more terrestrial, yet just as elusive. Tonight, you'll step into the haze of forgotten dynasties, where myth and memory blur until no one is sure where one ends and the other begins. This is the story of the Xia dynasty, the first Chinese dynasty, or possibly the first Chinese legend. Let's begin where most bedtime tales of history don't with a missing piece. In every schoolbook, you'll find a familiar sequence, Xia Shang Zhou, the triumvirate of China's earliest dynasties. But unlike the Shang and Zhou, which left behind bronzeware city ruins and oracle bones, the Xia remains frustratingly intangible. No firm inscriptions, no palace foundations, just a patchwork of archaeological hints and tales that drift like fog across millennia. So did it exist? Historians still argue whether the Xia dynasty was real or a retroactive invention by later dynasties, trying to legitimize their rule with a noble ancient lineage. Official Chinese history places the Xia dynasty around 2070 to 1600 BCE. It's said to have been founded by Yu the Great, a man who, according to legend, tamed the Great Flood by digging canals and redirecting rivers, earning him the mandate of heaven and the right to rule. That flood itself is interesting. Chinese legend speaks of it as a cataclysmic event, waters swallowing the land, people fleeing to mountaintops, entire regions submerged for decades. It's almost Noah-like in scale. Yet geologists in the Yellow River region have found sediment layers that suggest there may have been a real flood. A massive landslide around 1920 BCE, caused by an earthquake in the Jishi Gorge, dammed the Yellow River for months. When the natural dam finally burst, it unleashed one of the largest inland floods in Chinese prehistory. Villages were swept away, entire landscapes reshaped. If any group managed to survive that and restore order, it would have felt mythic. Perhaps Yu the Great was real. Or maybe he was a symbol, a human form wrapped around the memory of an environmental crisis and the social shift that followed. But what about the dynasty itself? Some archaeologists believe they've found it, or something close in the remains of the early Tu culture, unearthed near modern-day Luoyang. Dating back to 1500 BCE, Erlitou reveals signs of an advanced society, palatial buildings, bronze workshops, roads, pottery kilns, and organized urban planning. It's not definitive. There are no inscriptions shouting, "Here lies Xia," but the timeline fits, the layout fits, the sophistication fits, and yet, something's off. Despite the order and scale, the Erlitou site doesn't contain the lavish tombs or ritual sacrifices that later dynasties exhibited. Some scholars suggest it may have been a transitional society, not yet fully dynastic, but no longer tribal. A bridge. Others believe it was Xia itself, just without the grandeur the myths promised. So which is it? That's the problem. The Xia story is too good. Yu the Great is born of a divine dragon, tames a planetary flood, resists the temptation to pass the throne to his own son, only to eventually do so anyway, and creates the first hereditary monarchy. The court is wise, the people are loyal, the laws are just. It's the perfect founding myth, suspiciously perfect. Fringe historians suggest that Xia may have been a cultural template crafted during the Zhou dynasty as propaganda. The Zhou had just overthrown the Shang. To justify their rebellion, they needed a moral precedent, a time before the Shang when virtue reigned. The Xia became that precedent. Shang became the cautionary tale of corruption. But here's where things get strange. Across ancient Chinese texts, Xia is referenced with reverence, not just by rulers, but by poets, mystics, and hermits. In Taoist scrolls, the Xia are described as a people who walked with the stars and spoke with the rivers. One text claims that Yu the Great used a device to read the veins of the earth, an early version of geomancy, perhaps. Another references the Xia using musical stones to align their calendar with the cosmos. None of this has been verified, of course. But in 1978, archaeologists near Yanxi uncovered a jade disc embedded in the floor of a ceremonial structure. It was engraved not with writing, but with patterns that mirrored lunar phases and equinoxes. No one's sure what it meant, but it didn't belong to the Shang, and it predates the Zhou. Another clue lies in oral traditions among ethnic minorities in southwest China. The Miao and Yi peoples have flood myths eerily similar to the Xia tale, featuring a hero who channels water with magic stones or dragons, and who forms a righteous kingdom after the deluge. These groups weren't integrated into Han China until much later. So, how did they get the same myth? Some say it proves a shared cultural memory. Others whisper of a deeper, more controversial possibility that the Xia, if it existed, wasn't a Han dynasty at all, but part of a lost Pan-Asian civilization, one with multiple outposts and regional centers, now fractured into legend. Too speculative, possibly. But one thing is clear: whether myth or monarchy, the Xia represents something essential, the longing for a beginning. A time before corruption, before chaos. When people and nature worked in harmony. In the end, maybe the Xia dynasty isn't supposed to be found. Maybe it's meant to remain in the mist, always out of reach, always shimmering with potential. A mirror held up to each generation, asking not whether it was real, but whether it could be again. You pause standing at the edge of an archaeological site at dusk. The dust hangs in the air like fog. A distant figure walks the trench below, flashlight cutting across stone. Is that the past, or someone looking for it? Either way, the Xia waits. In stories, in stones, in the space between history and dream. By now, you've listened to rivers redirected by dragons, towers floating like feathers on the wind, and dynasties that may have never walked the earth. But tonight, we journey inward, not underground, not into the sky, but deep into the furnace of ambition, secrecy, and sorcery. You are entering the shadowed chambers of ancient Chinese alchemy, and its most elusive goal, immortality. Alchemy in the Chinese tradition wasn't quite like its European cousin. While the West often sought to turn lead into gold, Chinese alchemists, fangshi, or recipe men, were focused on transcending the limits of the human body. Not just extending life, but perfecting it, escaping death, becoming a Xian and immortal. And at the center of this obsession stood elixirs. You're probably picturing something dramatic: glowing liquids in jade bottles, steam hissing from golden cauldrons. You're not far off. Ancient texts describe elaborate methods for brewing these elixirs, recipes involving cinnabar, mercury, sulfide, gold flakes, mica, arsenic, and occasionally, ground pearls. Yes, pearls. The logic was that rare, untarnished substances, those that resisted decay, could infuse the body with their purity. It sounds poetic. It was also deadly. Historians still argue whether these alchemists knew they were slowly poisoning their clients or themselves. After all, mercury poisoning was a common cause of death among emperors who dabbled in these elixirs. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, famously died after consuming a so-called immortality pill made from mercury. His obsession with living forever may have killed him faster, but the practice continued dynasty after dynasty. Why? Because it wasn't just a science, it was a spiritual discipline. Chinese alchemy was divided into two paths: Weidan external alchemy and Nidan internal alchemy. Weidan involved physical substances, pills, brews, minerals. Nidan, on the other hand, was the alchemy of the body and breath. Through meditative practice, dietary regulation, breath control, and visualization, practitioners believed they could transform their internal energies, Jing Qi and Shen, into a kind of spiritual gold. You picture it now: an old master seated in stillness for hours, breathing in patterns, circulating qi through meridian points, imagining a furnace in the belly, a crucible in the chest, a cauldron in the skull. The body became a laboratory, the self, the experiment. One famous manual, the Cantong Qi, the seal of the unity of the three, blends metaphysics, cosmology, and chemical metaphors in such dizzying complexity that scholars are still decoding its layered meanings today. It doesn't give you a potion, it gives you a way of being. And that's the twist. While emperors sought bottled immortality, the real Fangxi knew that immortality wasn't about living forever, It was about changing your nature, becoming light, becoming wind, moving beyond the cycles of life and death altogether. But let's go back to the externalists for a moment. Because their labs weren't hidden in distant mountains, they were inside palace walls. The Tang dynasty in particular saw a flourishing of alchemical activity. Emperor Xuanzong built alchemical furnaces in his summer palace. His court magicians produced dozens of different pills, some said to pause aging, others to harden the bones. One surviving record mentions a paste that replenishes the marrow and causes the beard to blacken. It's made from powdered rhinoceros horn turtle shell and lotus root. Yum. One of the most tragic examples of this obsession was Emperor Wuzong of Tang, who consumed increasingly potent elixirs laced with mercury and arsenic. In his final months, he became paranoid, hallucinated ghosts in jade robes and issued royal edicts that made no sense. He died young. His remains were reportedly so toxic that his burial attendants wore cloth over their mouths. And yet, some claimed the emperor didn't die, that he simply shifted states, ascended. This belief wasn't limited to emperors. Several Taoist hermits throughout history were believed to have vanished entirely after a life of alchemical cultivation, leaving behind nothing but folded robes, or in one case, a single sandal, and a scent of cinnamon in the air. Could they have faked their deaths, or were they truly transformed? Some scholars point out that many of the poisonous elixirs taken in small amounts produce psychoactive effects, heightened sensory perception visions, feelings of euphoria. It's possible that some immortals were simply individuals who hallucinated their way out of mortality or helped others believe they had. But let's step further into the mystery. In southwestern China, an unassuming cave site known as Qixia holds inscriptions believed to be alchemical instructions. One reads cryptically, "Gather the dragon's breath at dawn. Heat not with flame, but with stillness. Add to the silver flower only when the wind stops." No one knows what the silver flower is. The cave's stone basin shows signs of fire exposure, but no ash. Nearby bones date back 1,800 years, but no burial markers exist. The place feels used but forgotten, like a recipe half-read. Modern chemistry can't explain it, nor can modern religion. And that's the enduring tension of Chinese alchemy. It lives in a space between science and myth, between pharmacology and poetry. Even today, echoes remain. In traditional Chinese medicine, many principles trace back to alchemical concepts. Tonics that tonify key herbs, that stabilize essence foods, that balance fire and water. The legacy of the fengshi is in your tea, your acupuncture, your breathwork class. So what was the real goal? Was immortality just a marketing term, a metaphor for enlightenment, or something they truly believed could be bottled? You sit quietly, imagining the glow of coals in an old furnace, the slow bubbling of an elixir, a monk murmuring chants as he watches mercury swirl like liquid mirror. In your hands is a cracked ceramic bottle, the label long gone, the contents dried. But still, something shimmers when the light hits it just right. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a whisper from the past, telling you that the real secret wasn't the potion. It was the pursuit. You've followed whispers of immortality through moonlit corridors and poison-laced potions, but now it's time to trace those dreams in the dirt, etched not in gold or silk, but in stone itself. Tonight, you're standing before the sky discs of the Liangzhu culture, one of ancient China's most enigmatic and artistically advanced Neolithic civilizations. And you're not alone, because these artifacts, smooth and silent as they may be, are staring back at you. Let's set the scene. Roughly 5,000 years ago, in the lower reaches of the Yangtze River Delta, the Liangzhu people built cities with stone foundations, palatial structures, water management systems, and tombs, richer than anything else from their time. But what they left behind above all were jade discs, known as bai, pronounced B. These perfectly circular artifacts appear in hundreds of elite burials always accompanied by Kong tubular jade objects, with square exteriors and circular hollows carved with mysterious faces or mask-like symbols. And while the Kong might suggest gods or spirits, the Bi discs offer even less explanation. They're smooth, untitled, unlabeled, and astonishingly precise. Many measure 30–40 centimeters in diameter, are razor thin, and have central holes that are mathematically perfect circles, despite being crafted without metal tools. Historians still argue whether the Bi discs were purely ritualistic, cosmological, symbolic of heaven, or something more functional. You kneel beside one in a museum display. It gleams under soft light. Its edges are so fine it almost hums. And you begin to wonder not just what it meant, but how on earth it was made. Because here's the thing, jade is one of the hardest stones on earth. It's tougher than steel. Even today, carving it requires diamond-tipped tools and machinery. Yet the Liangzhu artisans working 5 millennia ago somehow managed to sculpt, polish, and drill jade with sub-millimeter accuracy. No cracks, no flares, just perfect geometry. Fringe theorists love this. They call it evidence of advanced forgotten technology, a civilization with lost machines or extraterrestrial aid. Some even claim the Bi discs are remnants of an ancient energy grid or resonance technology designed to harmonize QE, the life force energy, through sound and vibration. Too fantastical, maybe, but let's return to the facts. The Bi discs were always placed beneath the bodies of elites, directly under the spine or head. Never randomly. Always in deliberate alignment. Taoist texts from much later periods describe heaven as a circle and earth as a square, echoing the geometry of the Bi and Kong. Did the Liangzhu create this symbolism, or did they inherit it from somewhere older? One theory proposes that the discs were sky mirrors, representing the heavens not only symbolically, but literally used to track celestial motion when laid flat on altars. Under certain light conditions, the central hole might cast a shadow or glow, marking the solstice or equinox. There's another possibility. Recent studies using 3D microscopy have revealed fine striations along the edges of some discs lines, too regular to be hand-scraped even with sand-based abrasives. Some believe this points to rope drills, weighted counterbalances, or other clever engineering tricks lost to time. Still, the question remains, why jade? Why such difficulty for an object that wasn't used as a tool or weapon? Because jade in ancient China wasn't just beautiful, it was sacred. Jade was believed to embody purity, immortality, and incorruptibility, the ideal medium for interacting with the divine. Even Confucius said jade represented the virtues of a gentleman, its smoothness, its resilience, its subtle glow. Maybe the Liangzhu thought of jade not as stone, but as congealed light, a frozen form of heaven. But here's where it gets haunting. The Liangzhu civilization vanished. Around 2300 BCE, their cities were abruptly abandoned. Their elite graves stopped appearing. Their jade workshops fell silent. No war, no famine, just a sudden silence. And for over 4,000 years, no one knew they had ever existed until a farmer in 1936 dug up a strange stone and held a mirror to a forgotten world. Some believe massive flooding ended Liangzhu. Others suspect a slow decline in political power. But the jade discs remain more enduring than their makers, more polished than the theories we wrap around them. One particularly eerie discovery came in the Fanshan tombs, where a dozen Bi discs were buried, stacked perfectly like records in a forgotten library. As if someone wanted to archive not words, but something deeper. Perhaps memory. Perhaps sound. Sound. Yes, sound. Experimental archaeologists have begun to test Bi discs for acoustic resonance, striking them gently with mallets or placing them on vibration plates. Some emit subtle tones, low ringing frequencies, like distant bells from an age with no clock. Was this intentional? Could the Liangzhu have used sound in rituals, believing that specific tones aligned them with celestial harmonics? Taoist texts written millennia later describe gong sounds that open gateways to heaven. Perhaps the Bi discs were keys, not decorations. Or perhaps they were all of these things: ritual, object, star chart, sound chamber, and status symbol. Jade that could speak. Stone that sang. As you sit now, you imagine being one of those artisans rubbing jade with sand and string for days, weeks, months, until a disc emerges glowing softly, smooth as moonlight. Would you see it as art, or would you believe you were making a portal, a way to touch heaven? Today, the Liangzhu culture is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Scholars are still unearthing new tombs, new discs, new theories. But the central mystery remains. What were these people trying to tell us? You turn the disc in your mind, watching the light reflect along its edge. Maybe it isn't an answer. Maybe it's a question in circular form. What lasts longer, civilization or silence? A city or a circle? You've run your fingers along polished jade felt vibrations from a time before writing and traced silent echoes from vanished cities. But now the air changes. It sharpens. You feel something almost electric, like stepping too close to a thunderstorm before the first drop falls. Because now you're standing in the presence of Qin Shi Huang's immortality elixirs, or more accurately, what's left of them. Yes, the same first emperor whose terracotta warriors have stared unblinking across 2 millennia. The same ruler who united China, built roads, standardized language, and may or may not be buried in a mercury-filled death trap beneath a still unopened tomb. But before his empire fell, Qin Shi Huang was obsessed with never dying. Let's rewind. Toward the end of his reign, after the wars were won and the Great Wall begun, Qin Shi Huang grew increasingly preoccupied with one thing: his own mortality. Perhaps the weight of empire made death feel closer. Perhaps he had already seen too many ghosts. Or perhaps he had been promised more. Because legend tells us that messengers began to arrive at court bearing scrolls, dreams, and strange maps. They spoke of lands across the eastern sea, Penglai, a mythical island where the immortals dwelled. There the peach trees bloomed once every 3,000 years. There the elixir of life was brewed in golden cauldrons, and there, if one were worthy, death could be bartered with. Qin Shi Huang sent ships, not one, not two, entire fleets. He commissioned an alchemist named Shu Fu, who gathered young men and women, skilled workers and scholars. The emperor gave him ship's grain jade and orders sail east. Find the elixir, return immortal. Shu Fu never came back. The official record claims his ships were lost. Others whisper that he found land and became a god king in what is now Japan. There are shrines to him in coastal Japanese villages to this day. Some scholars dismiss it as myth, but others believe there's linguistic and cultural residue hinting at real contact. Back in China, however, the emperor was running out of time and patience, so he turned inward. He ordered court alchemists to brew their own immortality elixirs. And here's where the story turns dangerous. These elixirs weren't made of spring water and lotus petals. They were concocted from mercury, arsenic, cinnabar, and various unidentifiable minerals. The emperor's daily pills intended to extend life instead corroded his mind and body. Accounts describe his deteriorating health, erratic behavior, paranoia, sudden fits of rage, and an increasingly reclusive lifestyle. He began to travel in secret, fearing assassination. He ordered roads cleared before him and slept in different places each night. His attendants were forbidden to speak unless spoken to. His robes were rumored to be lined with powdered pearls. Then, during one of his journeys in 210 BCE, he collapsed. The death was sudden, but the real mystery began afterward. Because his court, terrified of unrest, hid his death. They placed his corpse in a carriage surrounded by rotting fish to mask the smell. They continued to issue decrees in his name. By the time they reached the capital, weeks had passed, and the stench had grown unbearable. Only then was his death revealed. And only then did the empire begin to unravel. But what became of the elixirs? Some say they were buried with him in sealed vessels within the central tomb chamber. Others believe they were destroyed in panic to erase all trace of the court's fatal mistake. A few surviving texts, however, suggest something more curious. In 2019, archaeologists excavating near Xi'an discovered an ancient bronze vessel sealed with lacquer. Inside, they found a yellowish liquid. After careful analysis, it was identified as mercury mixed with herbal extracts. It was an immortality potion, still liquid after 2,000 years, still sealed, still deadly. You pause and imagine the scene, a court physician under torchlight stirring this glowing brew, testing its scent, tasting a single drop on his tongue, feeling the heat bloom behind his eyes. Writing a careful note on a bamboo slip causes a tightening in the chest. Fire in the mouth, dreams of birds. What were they chasing? The elixir wasn't just about never dying. It was about becoming something more, transcending form, moving from man to myth, from emperor to celestial being. And that dream didn't die with Qin Shi Huang. Dynasties later, other rulers continued the search. Emperors of the Han, Tang, and Ming periods all had their own fangxi, their own potions, their own near-deaths. One ruler reportedly turned green. Another began to smell of sulfur. Another claimed to speak with the moon after drinking a black fluid containing powdered antler and mica. In Taoist belief, the transformation from mortal to immortal wasn't always physical. Sometimes the body burned away, but the spirit lingered elevated by the process. The alchemists didn't fear death. They believed it could be shaped like clay, bypassed like a mountain trail known only to a few. One legend tells of a potion so powerful that it caused the drinker's bones to disappear, leaving only robes and teeth behind. Another speaks of a monk who became translucent, then invisible, then entirely wind. Perhaps none of it is real, or perhaps it's real in a different way, because even now, we're still chasing immortality through medicine, transhumanism, digital consciousness. Silicon Valley doesn't use mercury, but its goals aren't so different. And yet, no matter how high we climb, the same story repeats. The king, the emperor, the billionaire, they all drink from a cup they don't fully understand, and they all vanish. You look now at the foot of a massive tomb mound. Underground, somewhere beneath your feet, lies the body of Qin Shi Huang. Sealed chambers, traps, rivers of liquid mercury, and perhaps unopened vials, still waiting. You press your hand to the ground. It feels warm, or maybe that's your pulse. If those elixirs still exist, would you drink them? And if they worked, would you still be you? Some say Qin Shi Huang failed, but others believe that even in death he succeeded. His name endures, his mystery deepens, and in that way, perhaps, he did become immortal. You've wandered across the pages of alchemists, tasted mercury on your breath, and stood outside tombs sealed to time. Now let's look up, not into the sky this time, but into a golden basin of sun-drenched dirt where stories shimmer like mirages and questions outnumber answers. We're traveling west to the banks of the Min River near modern-day Chengdu, where something was unearthed that would shake the very structure of Chinese history. A place called Jinsha, and its relics whisper of a world that was supposed to be gone or never known at all. It was December of 2001. A construction crew was digging the foundations for a new real estate project when they hit something strange. A glint of metal, a shape too orderly to be rock. Soon, archaeologists were called in, and what followed was nothing short of breathtaking. They uncovered ivory tusks, jade daggers, gold masks, bronze ornaments, and most famously, a round gold artifact about the size of a dinner plate, shaped like the sun, with 12 radiating rays, and 4 abstract birds flying in a circle. It was named the Sun and Immortal Bird's Gold Ornament. You picture it now gleaming in a museum, delicate as lace, but eternal as a star. It had been buried in ritual pits among sacrificed animals, broken jade, and burned ivory. It was not discarded. It was offered to something or someone. But here's the twist: these relics didn't match any known Chinese civilization. They were neither Shang nor Zhou, the traditionally accepted early dynasties of China. They belonged to an entirely separate culture, the Shu people, who had once ruled the ancient kingdom of Shu, spoken of only briefly in myth and fragmentary texts. The Shu were thought to be legends, but suddenly they weren't, and this discovery echoed another. Just 20 miles away, decades earlier, another mysterious site called Sanxingdui had revealed giant bronze masks with protruding eyes, alien-like features, and towering human statues, unlike anything seen in Chinese art. Now Jinsha seemed to be connected. Was it the spiritual successor to Sanxingdui, a cultural sibling, or a separate mystery altogether? Historians still argue whether Jinsha was part of the same civilization, a rival city-state, or a ceremonial outpost. But one thing is clear: Jinsha rewrote the map. It showed that during the Bronze Age, far from the Yellow River heartland, where China's ancient narrative usually begins, another great civilization had flourished, one with its own language, myths, rituals, and cosmology. And we still can't read a word of it. No writing system has been found, no clear historical record, just objects perfectly crafted, meticulously placed, speaking in a visual language no one fully understands. You walk through the Jinsha site, now reconstructed for visitors. Stone walls curve where homes once stood. Deep pits reveal layers of offerings, sunken altars to a forgotten god, or perhaps the earth itself. You reach the edge of a pit and stare down into centuries of silence. What were the golden birds circling the sun meant to symbolize? Some say they represent the 4 cardinal directions, with the sun at the center, a spiritual compass, a cosmic map. Others think they depict the 4 seasons, or the 4 mythical birds of Chinese cosmology: the vermilion bird of the south, the azure dragon of the east, the white tiger of the west, and the black tortoise of the north, although the iconography doesn't quite match. Then there's the fringe theory. Some believe the artifact isn't just a symbol, but a star map or a mechanism like a flattened astrolabe. The number of rays and birds may correspond to specific celestial cycles or encode a calendar system lost to time. If the Shu had a system for tracking the heavens, where did they get it, and why did they hide it in the ground? Even more curious is how quickly it vanished. The Jinsha site seems to have collapsed abruptly around 500 BCE. The once thriving settlement was abandoned, its structures left to rot, its altars buried. There are no signs of war, no mass graves, no scorching fires. One explanation is flooding the nearby river may have shifted, submerging the city's foundations. But even that doesn't explain why such a sophisticated culture left no trace in subsequent dynasties. They didn't just move, they disappeared from memory. Until that fateful December in 2001. You can't help but feel the ache of erasure as you consider how many other cultures were lost this way, buried not by conquest, but by forgetfulness, by the silence of mud. And yet, through the gold relics, they speak again. The sun disk, now China's national symbol for cultural heritage, has become more than a museum piece. It's on currency, on posters, on stamps. It glows in classrooms, temples, airports, a reminder that even in mystery, beauty survives. You reach the final room of the Jinsha Museum. The lights are dim. A soft spotlight glows on the gold ornament floating behind glass. It doesn't feel ancient. It feels timeless, like a piece of the sky lowered to earth for safekeeping. You lean in, and suddenly it seems less like an object, and more like an eye, watching, waiting, still turning in that eternal circle of birds and fire and flight. You don't know what it means, and maybe that's the point. Sometimes we're not meant to solve history. Sometimes we're just meant to listen. You've gazed into golden discs, listened to the hush of vanished cities, and now you find yourself standing in a place you didn't expect, between two perfectly carved stone walls, your voice echoing back to you in the strangest way. It's like speaking into a giant ear. Welcome to the strange acoustic world of ancient Chinese sound mirrors, mysterious architectural features that seem designed not for the eye, but for the ear. If you've ever wandered through an old temple or garden in China, you may have experienced this without realizing it. A whisper traveling across a pond bouncing from wall to wall, a soft flute note hanging in the air longer than physics should allow. It's not your imagination. It's acoustics engineered perhaps with intention we're only beginning to understand. Let's step back. Ancient Chinese architecture wasn't just about symmetry and elegance. It was about resonance, both visual and vibrational. Palaces, pagodas, and gardens were often constructed according to feng shui principles, with precise alignments of energy flows, water channels, and geomagnetic lines. But what if some structures were built not just to please the eyes or spirits, but to shape sound? At the heart of this idea are the resonant stones, or sound mirrors, found in select imperial gardens and religious sites. Often placed at the entrances of pavilions or near sacred groves, these smooth round stone slabs, sometimes etched with symbols, respond in curious ways to voices, wind, or music. Stand in front of one and speak. The sound doesn't just reflect, it raps. It bounces back softer, delayed, and tinged with something that feels hollow, ethereal. You feel it now as you whisper into one of these curved stones on a foggy morning. Your words come back to you not as echoes, but as ghosts of themselves. Mainstream historians still argue whether these features were intentional acoustic tools or happy architectural accidents. Some scholars point to recorded rituals at Taoist temples that describe calling the spirit with music and stone, or letting the drums speak through the air itself. In the Ming and Qing dynasties, royal gardens like Beihai Park and Summer Palace featured echo walls and curved corridors that allowed whispers to travel from one end of a courtyard to another over 50 meters apart without raising your voice. Tourists still test this today, giggling across long corridors as their words skip like pebbles on water. But what about earlier? Did these designs appear before the documented dynasties? There's a compelling clue. In Yinshu, the ancient capital of the Shang dynasty, archaeologists discovered a network of ceremonial chambers lined with concave stone panels. The walls, seemingly decorative, amplify sound when struck. Musical chimes placed near these chambers seem to vibrate longer than expected, especially during solstice months. Could this be coincidence, perhaps? But ancient Chinese musical theory was already highly advanced. Instruments were tuned according to cosmic principles. The 5 tones, gong, shang, jiao, ji, yu, were mapped to planet seasons and even body organs. Sound wasn't just art, it was medicine, it was spiritual alignment, and that's where the idea of acoustic temples begins to shimmer into view. Some Taoist writings suggest that vibration is the language of immortals, that certain frequencies, when struck in the correct spatial alignment, can thin the veil between worlds. These writings refer to bell tones that unlock stars and mirror stones that sing back from the void. You picture a high priest standing alone in a stone courtyard, striking a bronze bowl. The note rings out not upward, but outward, through the pillars across the still pond into the heart of the temple. And from the far end, a second bowl hums in sympathy without being touched. It sounds impossible, and yet this phenomenon's sympathetic resonance is well understood today. Instruments can vibrate together if tuned to the same pitch. Could the ancients have harnessed this in architecture? Modern experiments suggest it's likely. In 2008, acoustic engineers studying the Echo Wall at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing recreated its geometry digitally and found that its curvature wasn't just aesthetically pleasing, it focused sound waves with startling precision. The wall, they concluded, acted as a parabolic reflector, channeling even the softest sounds across impossible distances. Now go deeper. At Lingyin Temple, a Buddhist monastery in Hangzhou, monks chant in unison inside a main hall with walls coated in a special clay mixture. Visitors often report feeling a pressure in the chest when chants begin, an auditory hug, or perhaps a vibration designed to open the heart chakra. Coincidence? Or a kind of ancient psychoacoustic engineering? Let's take it one eerie step further. In southern China, the Mazu temples dedicated to the sea goddess often feature large curved gongs and concave altars. During festivals, when drums beat and chants rise, visitors describe strange audio illusions, voices seeming to come from behind phantom footsteps or melodies that continue after instruments stop. Fringe researchers suggest that these temples functioned like natural amplifiers designed to manipulate perception. More skeptical scholars say it's just architectural quirk. But either way, the result is the same: you feel something. A hum in your bones, a tone that lingers behind your eyes. And that's the real magic of sound mirrors. They don't just bounce your voice back. They remind you that sound is a shape, a presence, a ghost in the room waiting to be stirred. You stand in the center of a forgotten temple ruin, now maybe near Luoyang or Suzhou, where nothing is marked, but the stones still curve inward, like hands cupping a secret. You sing a single note. It travels out, and then back. Different, warmer, deeper, as if the past is answering you in its own voice. Maybe these mirrors weren't for us to hear ourselves. Maybe they were for someone else to hear us. A spirit, a deity, or simply the earth listening. Because in the end, sound fades, but its shapes remain etched in stone, encoded in architecture, waiting for the next voice to wake them up again. You whisper once more, and wait. You've whispered into curved stones, let echoes tickle the edge of sleep, and listened for footsteps in forgotten temples. But now the whispers rise to a roar, not of voices, but of water. Tonight, we step into one of the oldest and most forbidden legends in Chinese history, the tale of Nuwa and the Great Flood. A myth so old that it lives beneath history itself. A story that shaped the very bones of civilization, and may still ripple beneath your feet. So let's begin with a sky that's breaking. In the earliest Chinese creation, myths, the world wasn't formed cleanly or kindly. It was chaos raw, swirling unfinished. Heaven and earth hadn't yet parted. Mountains drifted. The rivers had no course. And from this formless murk came Nuwa, a serpentine goddess with the head of a woman and the tail of a dragon. She didn't emerge with a sword or crown. She emerged with a mission to repair the broken world. Depending on the version, you hear the heavens cracked open after a great battle among celestial beings. Or maybe the sky had always been flawed, a divine mistake. Either way, the damage was catastrophic. Floods surged, mountains crumbled, and fire rained from the heavens. Nuwa, seeing the suffering of humans, decided to act. She descended to earth, gathered 5 colored stones, and smelted them in a sacred furnace. With this magical slurry, she patched the hole in the sky, rebuilt mountains, and placed 4 mighty pillars to hold the heavens steady. Some say she also created the first humans from yellow clay, shaping them by hand and breathing life into them through her song. Others claim that humans already existed, but were dying out, drowning in endless floodwater. Either way, Nuwa's act was not just a repair, it was a rebirth, the beginning of order. Now you may be thinking, well, that's a beautiful myth, but what if I told you there's more? Because ancient Chinese texts like the Shanhai Jing classic of mountains and seas and the Huainanzi don't treat the story of Nuwa as mere legend. They present it alongside dynastic records, geographical accounts, and star charts. It's given the same weight as the founding of cities or the naming of rivers. And then there's Yu the Great, the flood tamer. Not long after Nuwa, Chinese legend introduces Emperor Yu, a semi-divine hero who didn't stop the flood by blocking it, but by learning to live with it. He carved channels, dredged rivers, and reshaped the land to guide the waters safely. Yu was said to have worked for 13 years, passing his own home 3 times without entering it, so devoted was he to the task. In the end, he succeeded, founding the Xia dynasty, the first dynasty in traditional Chinese historiography. But modern historians still argue whether Yu the Great was real. Some dismiss him as a symbolic figure. Others point to geological evidence around 1920 BCE sediment layers across northern China suggest a massive flood event possibly triggered by a landslide or glacial lake burst. In 2016, scientists identified evidence of a catastrophic dam collapse along the Yellow River, which may have caused flooding across vast regions. The timeline eerily matches the myth, so here's where it gets murky in the best way. You have a flood myth, a goddess with divine tools, a mortal who engineers salvation, a dynasty born from water's defeat, and then you start to notice almost every ancient civilization has a flood myth, from Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh to India's tale of Manu to Mesoamerican stories of watery apocalypse. Even Plato's Atlantis was lost beneath the waves. Are these shared memories of a single global flood, or are they metaphors for collapse, for rebirth, for the struggle to master nature? Historians still argue whether these tales were invented in isolation or stem from a real ancient flood that humanity survived and mythologized. In Chinese tradition, the flood isn't just water, it's chaos. It's everything that cannot be tamed. It's the unruly, the wild, the unpredictable. And so, when Nuwa patches the sky, when Yu digs the channels, they're not just saving lives, they're making the world livable. You walk now beside the banks of the Yellow River, China's cradle of civilization. The silt glows gold in the dusk. The water runs fast, opaque, like it's still carrying secrets. In some places, the river has shifted so often it's called China's sorrow. Entire cities have been swallowed, crops erased, villages turned to silt. And every few centuries it happens again. The flood myth never left. Some Taoist temples still honor Nuwa with silent rituals during the rainy season. Small fires are lit, colored stones are laid in concentric circles, and a single note is sung, a tone that resonates with the earth, said to echo her original chant. Meanwhile, some fringe theorists propose something more radical. They believe Nuwa's story may hide knowledge of ancient technologies, perhaps even memory of geological disasters from the Ice Age. They cite the precision in early flood maps, the alignment of Yu's canals to modern hydrology, the ceremonial alignment of temples to high watermarks long erased. Could these myths be compressed history? If so, what else have we forgotten? You close your eyes and imagine Nuwa's hands shaping clay into people, smearing molten rock across the sky like a bandage. Her song rising above the storm, her eyes never blinking, because she knows the flood always returns. It rises in new forms, in new fears, in walls that crack, in levees that bend, in stories that go untold until they surge again. But so do we. We shape the clay again. We patch the cracks. We draw new maps. We remember. You floated through the floodwaters of myth, climbed the mountains Nuwa rebuilt, and now, still dripping with quiet awe, you open a book that doesn't tell a story. It asks one. Tonight, you're turning the pages of one of the oldest and most enigmatic texts in the world, the I Ching, or Book of Changes. But don't worry, you're not expected to understand it. No one really does. Not entirely. And maybe that's the point. The I Ching isn't a book in the way we think of books. It's more like a mirror, a map, and a riddle all bound together. It doesn't offer answers, it offers patterns. And once you see them, they start showing up everywhere. Let's begin where scholars agree, sometime around 3,000 to 3,500 years ago, Chinese sages began recording a system of hexagrams, 6-line symbols made up of broken and unbroken lines. Each hexagram represented a state of change, a moment in time, a kind of energy or transformation. There are 64 hexagrams in total. Each is like a snapshot of reality's shifting tide. One moment you're flowing like water, the next you're rigid as stone. One hexagram may describe conflict and resolution, another abundance and caution, another stillness before the leap. The lines shift, the meanings blend, but there's always motion. Traditionally, one would cast yarrow stalks or later coins, and from the random result, determine a hexagram. Then, you'd read its meaning not as fate, but as a reflection of your current moment. A guide, a whisper of pattern from the chaos. And here's where it gets wild. The I Ching wasn't just used by mystics in robes. It was consulted by emperors, strategists, military leaders, and scholars for over 2,000 years. Confucius himself studied and annotated it. Leibniz, the father of binary code, drew parallels between the yin-yang line structure of the I Ching and modern ones and zeros. Historians still argue whether the I Ching is philosophy divination or proto-science. But let's return to you, sitting cross-legged on a quiet temple floor, I Ching in your lap, incense curling toward the rafters. You cast the coins, slowly turn the page, and discover your hexagram. Hexagram 29, the abysmal. It speaks of danger, of water flowing through a ravine, of holding steady, trusting inner discipline. And just like that, your heart slows. Not because the book told you what to do, but because it named the shape of what you're already in. The I Ching doesn't predict, it reveals, and its greatest power lies in its structure. Every hexagram is built from 2 trigram sets of 3 lines, representing elemental forces: heaven, earth, water, fire, mountain, thunder, wind, and lake. These 8 trigrams form the Bagua, a symbolic framework still used today in feng shui martial arts and Taoist metaphysics. Each trigram has a direction, a season, a family role, even an animal. And each interacts with the others in ways that mimic the dance of the cosmos. Think of it as the DNA of reality, but made from energy, not molecules. You look up now at an ancient diagram etched in stone, a circle of trigrams spinning like a compass. This is the Fuxi Bagua, said to have been discovered by the legendary culture hero Fuxi, who saw a dragon horse rise from the Yellow River bearing the patterns on its back. A literal creature, or a metaphor for revelation. We may never know. Fringe theorists see in this diagram an ancient binary system, proof that early Chinese sages had tapped into mathematical structures that predate formal logic. They cite the structure of the hexagrams as evidence of base 2 computation, which modern digital systems also use. It's like discovering a computer encoded in bamboo. But mainstream scholars push back. They argue that this resemblance is coincidental, that the I Ching is a deeply symbolic and psychological tool closer to Jungian archetypes than mathematics. Still, the mystery remains. How did such a complex dynamic system evolve so early in human history? The oldest layers of the I Ching, known as the Zhouyi, date to the Western Zhou dynasty, c. 1000 BCE. But many believe its core ideas are much older, oral traditions passed down through generations of shamans and philosophers long before ink met paper. And yet, it's still being used. You can download an app, spin a digital coin, read a modern translation, and still it speaks. Even now, some Chinese CEOs, politicians, and creatives consult the I Ching before making big decisions. Not because they expect magic, but because the process forces a kind of reflective clarity, a way to pause, frame your thoughts, and accept that nothing is fixed. Because that's the I Ching's central truth: change is the only constant. When dynasties fall, when wars break out, when floods rise, what survives? Not walls, not gold, but the knowledge that this too shall pass, and every moment carries the seed of its opposite. You may feel weak, yet strength is building beneath your surface. You may be waiting, yet motion is preparing. The I Ching doesn't give you power. It reminds you you already have it. You close the book now, not with a sense of conclusion, but with a strange comfort. It didn't explain the universe, it just held a mirror. And the face in that mirror, it's always changing. You've just shut the I Ching, your fingers still tingling from the strange clarity it offered. But don't get too comfortable, because now we're diving into something even more mysterious and possibly much older. Tonight, you're walking into a chamber of stars. But these aren't twinkling in the sky, they're etched in ink, scratched into bronze, and aligned with mountains you didn't know had names. It's time to explore the ancient Chinese zodiac, and more specifically, the hidden meanings buried deep within its 12 familiar animals. Because what you think you know, rat, ox, tiger, dragon, is only the beginning. At first glance, the Chinese zodiac looks like a fun personality quiz. Are you a clever rat? A stubborn ox? A dreamy rabbit? We see it on restaurant placemats and in New Year decorations. But underneath its cheerful surface lies an ancient cosmological code, a system not just for marking time, but for mapping cycles of nature, fate, and the unseen rhythms of reality. Let's start with the basics. The Chinese zodiac is based on a 12-year cycle each year assigned to one of 12 animals. The cycle is also paired with the 5 elements wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, and with yin and yang, giving each year a unique combination that doesn't repeat for 60 years. You right now are living out just one small thread in that immense woven fabric, and that thread might echo events from 60 or even 600 years ago. But where did these animals come from? One popular story goes like this. The Jade Emperor, ruler of heaven, once summoned all the animals to a great race across a river. The first 12 to arrive would earn a place in the zodiac. The rat, clever and tiny, rode on the back of the ox and jumped ahead to win. The pig came last, having stopped for snacks and a nap. It's a charming tale, but it's also a mnemonic device, a story that helps remember something deeper. Because the zodiac animals are more than characters, they're astronomical markers. Each animal corresponds to a direction, season, and month. The tiger rules spring's beginning. The horse gallops through summer. The rooster crows at the dawn of autumn. The pig dozes through winter's death and rebirth. And beyond that, each animal is tied to specific stars and constellations, especially those visible in China's night sky during its assigned time of year. For example, the dragon, far from being pure myth, is linked to the azure dragon of the East, one of the 4 celestial guardians of Taoist cosmology. During the spring equinox, the stars that form the dragon's constellation rise at dawn, symbolizing birth and new power. Historians still argue whether the zodiac was originally a calendar, an astronomical tracking system, or a spiritual tool. Probably all 3. But here's where it gets stranger. Some scholars and independent researchers believe the zodiac encodes knowledge far beyond its surface use. Hidden within its cyclical framework may lie records of astronomical events, solar and lunar patterns, or even geomagnetic changes. There are theories, unconfirmed but intriguing, that suggest the zodiac marks not just years, but epochs. That every full 60-year cycle coincides with subtle shifts in Earth's magnetic field, weather patterns, or even mass psychology. You're probably thinking, that's a bit much for a system that includes a monkey and a rooster. But consider this: ancient Chinese scientists were tracking comets, eclipses, and planetary motions with astonishing precision thousands of years ago. The zodiac, wrapped in metaphor, may have been the public-facing layer of much deeper knowledge, like a colorful lock covering a serious mechanism. And then there's the 13th animal. Yes, there are whispers of a forgotten sign, one that didn't make it into the official 12. In some regional folk tales, a cat was also invited to the Jade Emperor's race. But the rat tricked it, causing it to oversleep. Since then, the cat hates the rat, and so the story goes, this is why cats chase rats to this day. But symbolically, the cat represents something excluded, a force that didn't quite fit the celestial balance. Could the cat represent a lunar calendar divergence, a lost star, or an ancient system erased and rewritten? Historians aren't sure. Meanwhile, in some ancient Buddhist calendars and Silk Road variations of the zodiac, other animals appear. Instead, elephants, deer, even snakes with feathers. These anomalies suggest the system was once more fluid, shaped by regional beliefs and trade route influences. And then, there's the unsettling detail: the zodiac isn't only used for birthdays and New Year's. It's also been used to choose burial dates, predict political coups, plan royal births, and even justify wars. In the Han Dynasty, astrologers used the zodiac to argue that a dynasty's fall was written in the stars. Entire cities trembled when a rare alignment occurred. A birth under the wrong combination of year and hour could be considered ominous. And it's not just ancient. In 1966, during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong reportedly consulted his astrological chart before launching key initiatives. Not publicly, of course, but behind closed doors, the old beliefs still murmured. Now let's get personal. Think of your own sign. Think of the animal, the element, the direction. Have you ever noticed strange patterns that align with your year? How certain years seem to hum with a familiar energy, as if the wheel had turned and landed exactly where it had before. That's the hidden power of the zodiac. It's not just fortune cookie fluff. It's a timekeeper, a myth engine, a cosmic clock that doesn't tick forward, but in spirals. You look now at a circular carving on a temple ceiling. 12 animals racing around the center. You realize it's not just a calendar. It's a mandala, a mirror of how time moves, not in straight lines, but in returns. And if time is a spiral, where are you now? Coming back around to a lesson you missed, returning to a strength you once held, or spiraling into something entirely new. The zodiac doesn't tell you, but it lets you feel it. And sometimes that's enough. You've spun the zodiac wheel, glimpsed cycles within cycles, and perhaps started to suspect Chinese mythology doesn't just live in the stars or scrolls. It breathes in machines. And tonight, we lift our gaze from animal signs to something even stranger, a vehicle. Not one pulled by horses, not one that sails or floats, but one that flies. Yes. Tonight, you're stepping into one of the most fascinating and controversial myths of ancient China, the story of the Yellow Emperor's flying chariot. A legend that leaves behind the comfortable terrain of historical possibility and soars straight into the skies of speculation. Let's start with the Yellow Emperor himself. Known as Huangdi, he's more than a mythic ruler. He's regarded as a founding ancestor of Chinese civilization. His reign is dated symbolically at least to around 2697 BCE. Under his rule, it's said that writing, the compass, medicine, and music were developed. You could call him a divine inventor, a cultural Prometheus. But one invention stands out, shimmering with strangeness. Some ancient texts, including the Shiji records of the Grand Historian and various Taoist scrolls, describe Huangdi as possessing a chariot that flew. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. Descriptions vary. In some accounts, it was a cloud chariot guided by dragons. In others, it was a vehicle powered by Qi, the life force energy that flows through all things. Some say it was a metallic vessel that roared like thunder and moved against the wind. A little dramatic, right? Except, here's where things get weirder. This isn't the only flying machine myth in ancient China. There are multiple mentions, scattered, fragmented, and coded, of feathered machines, flying wheels, floating towers, and metal birds with hollow bellies. The Baopuzi, a 4th century Taoist text by Ge Hong, describes alchemists building a flying apparatus using mercury pulleys and spinning wheels. Another tale from the Liezi tells of a man named Lu Ban, an ancient engineer who built a wooden bird that could fly for 3 days. Historians still argue whether these were literal devices, symbolic references to spiritual flight, or dreamlike metaphors for transcendence. But think about this. Why so many references? Why the consistency across time, region, and writer? And why do so many descriptions include mechanical detail, moving parts, balance systems, propulsion, metaphors? It starts to raise questions. Questions like, did ancient engineers experiment with flight, not just mythically, but physically? We know that kites originated in ancient China. The earliest references appear around 500 BCE, though they may be older. These weren't just toys. They were used for measuring wind scouting terrain and even signaling across battlefields. From kites, it's a short leap, metaphorically at least, to gliders. Fringe theorists and some experimental historians believe it's possible that early Chinese inventors may have built large-scale kites capable of lifting a person briefly off the ground. Stories of human flight trials, often ending in disaster, appear in scattered folk tales. The line between legend and history gets thinner the higher we go. Then there's the deeper layer, alchemical flight. Taoist texts often describe ascension to the heavens not through death, but through transformation. The body becomes lighter. Bones dissolve into air. The adept, through breath control elixirs and deep meditation, sheds earthly weight and rises. Could the myth of Huangdi's flying chariot be a symbolic encoding of alchemical process? Could the roaring machine be a metaphor for spiritual combustion, the burning away of ego matter limitation? Maybe. But then again, the ancients were excellent engineers. Remember, Huangdi is credited with inventing compasses, wagons, and musical instruments that rely on vibration and rotation. If he or the scholars writing about him understood magnetic north and sound frequencies, perhaps the leap to theoretical flight isn't so absurd. Some have compared these myths to the Vimanas of Indian lore, flying palaces described in Sanskrit epics. The parallels are hard to ignore: airborne vehicles, celestial battles, technological precision in mythic clothing. Could there have been cultural exchange or shared memory of a forgotten technology? Mainstream historians caution against this. There's no physical evidence, no recovered flying chariots, no blueprints, nothing to carbon date. And yet, there's a phrase you've heard before, maybe whispered in a temple corridor or scratched into the margin of an old scroll. That which rises must someday return. And maybe that's what happened. Maybe someone built something, and then it fell, or was buried, or became so sacred that its knowledge was hidden, not lost, but guarded. Because flight, after all, is dangerous. To rise above the earth is to challenge the natural order. It's to mimic the immortals. In ancient times, that was a risk, a sacred trespass, and sacred things are often cloaked in story to protect them. So here you are, watching the stars from a mountainside where once perhaps a golden chariot lifted off into the night. You don't need to believe it happened. That's not the point. The point is this: humans have always looked at the sky and wanted more. Not just escape, but understanding. Not just elevation, but expansion. Maybe Huangdi didn't fly in a chariot made of dragonfire and bronze gears. Maybe he imagined it, and that imagining was enough to lift the culture forward. Because every myth of flight contains the same truth: we weren't meant to stay grounded forever. Even in sleep we fly, even in stories we lift. And sometimes when the wind hits just right and the moonlight wraps around the hills like silk, you swear you hear it. A low hum, a whisper of gears turning, and the breath of something ancient, rising. You've just disembarked from the skies where dragons soared and ancient chariots may have rumbled against the wind. But now the air grows salty. The waves lap against stone harbors, long lost to memory. You are standing at the edge of the known world, and tonight we set sail with a man whose story seems almost too big for history to contain. His name is Admiral Zheng He, and while his voyages are recorded in annals and maps, the end of his journeys, the disappearance of China's massive maritime fleets, is a mystery still soaked in salt and silence. Let's set the scene. It's the early 1400s, long before Columbus even dreamed of the Atlantic. China under the Ming dynasty is rich, powerful, and united. The Emperor Yongle has big dreams. He wants the world to know the Middle Kingdom is not to be trifled with. Enter Zheng He, a Muslim eunuch born in Yunnan, captured as a boy, and eventually entrusted with one of the most ambitious naval programs the world had ever seen. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He commanded 7 epic voyages sailing as far as India, Arabia, and the east coast of Africa. His fleet, massive. We're not talking little wooden sailboats. We're talking treasure ships, or baochuan, some allegedly up to 400 feet long, with 9 masts and multi-deck levels. Compare that to Columbus's largest ship, the Santa Maria, which was about 85 feet long. It's like matching a toy boat against a modern cruise liner. Zheng He's fleet included over 300 ships and tens of thousands of men, sailors, interpreters, doctors, astronomers, soldiers, and diplomats. They brought silk porcelain lacquerware and returned with giraffes, spices, gold exotic woods, and tribute from more than 30 kingdoms. This wasn't conquest. This was diplomacy with grandeur. And yet, after his final voyage, nothing. The fleets were dismantled. The records were burned. Zheng He died, some say, at sea, some say in obscurity. The greatest maritime program in Chinese history vanished as if it had never existed. Historians still argue why. Some blame a change in leadership. The emperor who sponsored the voyages died, and his successors were more conservative, more Confucian. They saw the expeditions as wasteful, extravagant, and spiritually impure. Others cite economic strains, northern threats, or internal politics. But fringe theorists whisper something else, that Zheng He went further than we know. There are legends scattered, often scoffed at that claim he reached the Americas or even Australia decades before European explorers. Some maps, like the controversial Piri Reis map, seem to suggest knowledge of coastlines unknown to 15th century Europe. In 2006, Chinese author Gavin Menzies published 1421, the year China discovered America, arguing Zheng He's fleets circumnavigated the globe and left traces in places as far as South America and the Arctic. Most mainstream scholars dismiss this. The evidence is weak, they argue, and the timeline strained. Still, the theory captures imagination. Could the records of further voyages have been deliberately destroyed? We know some logs were preserved barely. The Yingya Shenglan, written by Ma Huan, a translator, aboard several voyages, offers fascinating glimpses into the cultures they encountered. But it's also full of gaps, missing entries, descriptions that feel censored. And what about the ships? Despite their size, no remains of the treasure ships have been found. Not one. That's not unusual. Wooden ships don't always survive centuries, but it does add to the sense that something's missing. Archaeologists have located ancient shipyards in Nanjing with dry docks that could support enormous vessels. Stone anchors have been recovered, but no hulls, no sails, no complete blueprints. And perhaps the strangest question of all, why didn't the world follow? Why? If China had mastered such naval power, didn't it become the world's colonial empire? Why didn't it dominate the oceans? One theory, because it chose not to. In Confucian, thought stability at home was more virtuous than dominance abroad. Foreign lands were seen not as conquests, but as tributaries. When the political tides turned, expansion was no longer honorable. It was dangerous hubris. Or perhaps the fleet saw something they weren't meant to. Something so troubling, so destabilizing, that it was better left unsaid. You imagine Zheng He's final voyage. A storm closing in. A coastline unknown. A crew whispering about strange stars overhead and creatures glimpsed in the shallows. The admiral, weary but unafraid, stepping onto a black beach that no map remembered, and then turning back, silently. Whatever he found, he left behind, and China turned inward. Shipbuilding was restricted. Foreign travel was discouraged. A nation that once ruled the sea now watched it from the shore. Its greatest explorer remembered only in fragments. But something lingers. In places like Malacca, Calicut, Hormuz, and Mombasa, oral traditions speak of great Chinese ships of visitors who came bearing gifts, not swords. In some African carvings, images of robed men with narrow eyes and strange hats. In old Chinese scrolls, faded ink depicting coastlines shaped like no Asian continent. And you sitting by the sea now feel it in the wind, a story too big to hold in words. A ghost fleet still sailing. The waves rise, the stars shift, and far across the water you hear a low creak of timbers and the cry of a long-forgotten sail unfurling in the dark. You follow Zheng He's sails to the edges of the known world, trace the ghostly echo of a vanished fleet, and yet even now, the silk threads of history cling to your fingers. Tonight, we sink even deeper into China's most enigmatic legacy, the origin of silk itself. Not the industry, not the trade routes, but the mystery of silk, how it was discovered, who first tamed it, and why, for thousands of years, it remained China's most guarded secret. Close your eyes. You're sitting in an orchard of mulberry trees. The air is warm and buzzing with life. Above you, silk moths flit like living snowflakes. Their cocoons hang like pearls, tiny miracles of nature, each containing a secret strand that, when unwound, stretches hundreds of meters. Now picture a woman. She sits beneath the shade of a tree drinking tea. A cocoon falls into her cup, and the legend begins. That woman was Leizu, wife of the Yellow Emperor. According to myth, she noticed the cocoon unraveling in her hot tea and with a curious hand drew out the shimmering thread. From that moment, she became the goddess of silk, the first to spin the thread, the first to weave. Whether true or not, the myth hides a simple truth: no one knows exactly how silk was discovered. Silk production, or sericulture, is a delicate and complex process that requires intentionality. You need to rear silkworms on mulberry leaves, harvest the cocoons, boil them, and carefully unwind the threads. This isn't a happy accident, it's a technological mastery. The earliest confirmed use of silk in China dates back to around 2700 BCE, though archaeological finds have pushed that back further. In Henan province, silk threads have been found in Neolithic tombs, preserved against time like whispering ghosts. And yet, for over 2,000 years, no one outside of China knew how silk was made. It was exported along the legendary Silk Road, traded for gold horses, glass, and spices. Roman emperors wore silk with trembling reverence. Persian royalty taxed it like treasure. And yet, they had no idea how it came to be. Some believed it grew from the soil like a plant. Others thought it was combed from the leaves of magical trees. Pliny the Elder, Rome's great naturalist, wrote that silk came from the bark of a tree, carded and combed like wool. The real answer remained guarded under penalty of death. That's not exaggeration. For centuries, the Chinese government enforced secrecy around silk production with extreme measures. Silkworm eggs were contraband. Tools used in reeling silk were guarded like weapons. Anyone caught trying to smuggle silkworms out of the empire could be executed. And yet, the secret did eventually spread. Legend says that in the 6th century, 2 Nestorian monks traveling under Byzantine orders smuggled silkworm eggs inside hollowed-out bamboo canes, delivering them to Emperor Justinian. Others suggest spies bribed or seduced sericulture workers. Whatever the truth, by the 7th century the silk monopoly was broken. But not the mystery, because there's still one question that scholars and historians quietly ask: how did early Chinese civilization develop such advanced textile techniques so early? Think about it. Silk requires not only the care of silkworms, but also spindle technology, weaving looms, dye chemistry, mass production systems. It's one thing to domesticate animals for food, another entirely to turn tiny insects into the heart of a global luxury economy. Some fringe theorists propose that sericulture may have originated from an older, forgotten civilization, a technological legacy passed down after a great collapse. Others speculate that observation of natural phenomena like spiderwebs or animal fur may have inspired the idea of extracting and spinning fine threads. Still others point to the symbolic power of silk in Taoism and alchemy. In Taoist texts, silk is associated with transformation. The cocoon becomes the chrysalis, the thread becomes the robe. It's used in ritual clothing, in divination scrolls, and in cosmic maps. Some Taoist diagrams are painted exclusively on silk to reflect their sacred geometry. Silk wasn't just a product, it was a medium of magic, and perhaps a code. Some believe early silk garments were woven with symbolic stitch patterns, forming messages visible only under certain light or fold. A lost language of the elite, a hidden script in shimmering thread, and you running your fingers along a fragment of brocade buried in a tomb for 3,000 years, feel it. A vibration, as if the fabric still remembers the hands that wove it. There's also the curious story of silk mummies. In tombs like those at Mawangdui, the dead were wrapped in up to 20 layers of silk. The preservation is astonishing: bodies, still supple skin intact. Scientists have long studied this, noting how the unique combination of airtight coffins, charcoal layers, and silk wrapping created a near-perfect seal against time. But some wonder, was the silk just clothing? Or was it an energy barrier, part of a ritual practice meant to preserve the soul? It wouldn't be the first time textile was used as spiritual technology. And there's one last mystery: spider silk. Ancient Chinese texts mention silk threads as fine as shadow, used in ceremonial bows or for stitching imperceptible seams. Some believe these may have referred to wild silks or even early attempts to harvest spider silk, something modern scientists are only just now beginning to achieve with synthetic biology. If that's true, then ancient silk production wasn't just advanced, it was light years ahead. You're standing now in a chamber where the air smells like ink and cedar. Rolls of dyed silk hang from the rafters, red, like fire, black, like night. Each roll a secret, each thread a history, and in the center a single cocoon. Small, silent, spun in the dark. You touch it gently and imagine the empires it built, the lives it preserved, the stories it carried from one side of the world to the other. A whisper of a whisper, a thread too fine to see yet strong enough to pull the world into its web. You've just run your fingers along the shimmering threads of silk, threads that held empires together, whispered secrets through ritual, and cocooned the dead in their journey to the next world. Now your path takes a sharp turn downward, quite literally. You descend beneath a slow, ancient river. The water above is calm, but below, etched into submerged stone, lies one of China's strangest and most ignored mysteries. Tonight, you're exploring the hieroglyphs of Baiheliang, a submerged stone ridge in the Yangtze River that, when the water recedes just enough, tells a story only a drought can reveal. Let's set the scene. Baiheliang, or the White Crane Ridge, is located near Fuling in Chongqing Province. For most of the year, it sits invisible beneath the waters of the river. But for centuries, especially during the dry seasons of ancient China, it would emerge like a message from the depths. And what messages they are! Across a 600-meter stone reef carved directly into the rock are over 160 inscriptions, some dating back more than 200 years to the Tang dynasty. These aren't just scribbles, they're deliberate formal records. Some are engraved poems, others record river water levels during specific droughts. Still others depict mysterious symbols and rare characters that don't quite match standard Chinese script. These inscriptions were made by scholars, monks, local officials, and maybe, just maybe, someone else entirely. So why carve messages here? Because Baiheliang served as a natural hydrological gauge. Before modern instruments, it allowed observers to track the water levels of the Yangtze during dry spells. If the markings appeared, it meant drought had arrived. If the lower carvings stayed submerged, it meant all was well, at least for the crops. But there's something odd. Among the precise records and drought warnings are hieroglyph-like characters, some of which have no clear translation even today. Historians still argue whether these were early regional scripts, ceremonial marks, or something symbolic, perhaps even connected to lost religious or astronomical systems. And that's not all. Some of the carvings seem to align with solstice sunrises, water shadows, and even star positions. Could Bai Heliang have been more than a river gauge? Could it have doubled as a kind of submerged calendar, or even an oracle site? Remember, water in Taoism isn't just a resource. It's a living force symbolic of change, time, and truth. And the Yangtze River, the Long River, is one of China's spiritual arteries. What better place to record the cyclical breath of heaven and earth than on a rock that disappears and reappears with nature's pulse? But then something changed. In 2003, the Three Gorges Dam project raised the water levels of the Yangtze, significantly submerging Bai Heliang permanently, or so it seemed. To prevent the total loss of this unique site, engineers constructed an underwater museum, encasing the reef in a pressurized climate-controlled chamber with underwater viewing galleries. You can now visit Bai Heliang year-round, though through thick glass, dim lighting, and filtered silence. It's like seeing a ghost behind aquarium glass. And here's a question no one quite answers. Why did they go to such lengths? China has many heritage sites. Why preserve this rock, this strange slab of old warnings and poetic sighs, so meticulously? Some believe it's because the markings on Bai Heliang contain long-term climate records that are now invaluable in understanding modern environmental shifts. Others think the site may encode ritual knowledge lost after the fall of certain dynasties. But fringe voices suggest something else. They argue that Bai Heliang's unknown symbols, some resembling spirals, tridents, sunbursts, or even alien script, indicate a much older pre-dynastic origin. That perhaps the Tang inscriptions were just the most recent layer carved atop something more ancient and mysterious. A legacy scratched by forgotten hands, preserved not in libraries, but beneath a river. You trace your finger along one symbol, 3 interlocking rings, and feel a familiar unease. It doesn't match Chinese calligraphy. It doesn't resemble Taoist iconography. It looks almost mathematical, like a code or a formula. And then you notice something else. Many inscriptions mention droughts, yes, but also comets, celestial omens, and animal migrations. One poem describes a beast with 2 backs rising from the river's heart and stars falling into the west like drums of war. What does that mean? Is it metaphor or a memory of something no longer understood? Think of it this way. What if Bai Heliang wasn't merely a rock with graffiti, but a layered dataset maintained by generation after generation? A stone ledger of the river's moods, the sky's warnings, and humanity's trembling attempts to interpret them. There's a quiet genius in placing your history somewhere that only shows up during crisis. When the river dropped low, revealing the inscriptions, people knew this moment matters. A signal, a record, a lesson from ancestors who faced the same uncertainty. And now, ironically, Bai Heliang is underwater all the time, revealed only with technological effort. It's as if the message has flipped. Now it's we who must dive to read the past. And what might it be telling us? That climate ebbs and flows, that civilizations rise and fall, that the river forgets nothing, and that some stories, if carved well enough, outlast even the currents that try to erase them. You're kneeling now before the thick glass of the museum. Just beyond, a monk's poem from the Song dynasty glows faintly in your flashlight beam. It reads, "Water falls, mountains endure. The river speaks when we learn to listen." You close your eyes and let the silence rush in. Above you, tourists chatter. Boats pass. Cities blink with electric light. But below, the river remembers. And sometimes, if you're still enough, it tells you something in symbols too deep for language. You've just surfaced from the depths of a submerged stone diary where floods and droughts whispered secrets through symbols etched in silence. But now, as we near the end of our journey, it's time to explore something more ethereal. Something that flows not through stone or water, but through the very veins of the earth. Tonight, you find yourself standing atop a wind-swept ridge. The soil hums beneath your feet. The mountains around you seem to lean in ever so slightly. And then, you feel it, a pull, like a thread running through the landscape itself. This is the realm of dragon veins, and the mysterious energy grid said to shape China's ancient landscapes, palaces, and even the fate of emperors. Let's begin with a simple truth. Feng Shui is not just furniture placement. At its most ancient core, it's a system of aligning humans with Earth's energetic patterns, and central to this system is the concept of longmai, or dragon veins. In Chinese geomancy, dragon veins are invisible channels of energy flowing through the land, much like meridians in the human body. They connect mountains, rivers, valleys, and cities, creating a network of qi, or life force. The ancients believed these veins held power, vital energy that, if harnessed properly, could bring prosperity, harmony, and even immortality. Ignore the modern pop culture feng shui for a moment, the stuff about where to put your bed or lucky bamboo. This goes much deeper. We're talking about city planning, tomb placement, and the very rise and fall of dynasties. Consider the Forbidden City in Beijing. Built in the early 1400s, this sprawling imperial complex wasn't just architecturally majestic. It was designed in harmony with specific dragon veins. Its orientation, layout, and surrounding landscape were selected to capture and concentrate auspicious qi. The same is true of countless imperial tombs, temples, and sacred mountains. Historians still debate how literal this was, whether emperors genuinely believed in geomantic currents or used feng shui to legitimize their rule. Either way, the result is the same. China's landscape is a living map of intentional alignment. But what exactly are these veins? Some say they correspond to fault lines and geological stress points. Others link them to magnetic anomalies, subsurface water flows, or even telluric currents, natural electromagnetic fields generated by the Earth itself. There's a growing field of research exploring whether ancient cultures, not just in China but globally, may have detected and mapped subtle energy flows using observation, trial and error, and intuition. Think of ley lines in Britain or song lines in Aboriginal Australia. Each tradition recognizes that land holds memory and that where you build matters. Now picture this. You're climbing Mount Song, one of China's 5 great mountains. It's said to be a dragon's head, where qi emerges from the earth. Monks here have practiced meditation for millennia, not just for spiritual insight, but to tune themselves to the earth's breath. Shaolin monks even design their martial arts routines to harmonize with this pulse. Nearby, ancient pagodas lean slightly toward invisible channels. Trees grow in strange spirals. And on stormy nights, some say you can hear a deep hum, as if the mountain itself were alive. Could that hum be a real, measurable vibration? Fringe researchers have brought seismographs, EMF detectors, and magnetometers to known dragon vein locations. Some report subtle anomalies, slight increases in geomagnetic flux fluctuations in background radiation. Not enough to draw hard conclusions, but enough to spark questions. Mainstream science remains skeptical. But traditional practitioners insist you don't measure a dragon vein, you feel it. And sometimes, people do. Taoist sages speak of places that make the bones light, where one's breath syncs with the wind, and time seems to slow. These are spots where energy coalesces, where temples are often built, and where emperors chose to be buried. Some dragon veins are said to be benevolent, others dangerous. A misplaced structure can cause sickness, failure, or war. A well-placed one, it could ensure peace for generations. You might be tempted to laugh until you realize how many major cities across Chinese history align with these ancient principles. Chang'an, modern Xi'an, Luoyang, Nanjing, and Beijing were all carefully chosen not just for strategic defense, but for geomantic flow. Even modern infrastructure sometimes bows to these patterns. In recent years, builders of high-speed rail lines have been rumored to consult geomancers before digging tunnels through sacred ridges. A few government projects have even been delayed due to feng shui protests, where locals claimed the new construction would sever a dragon's spine. And if you're still unconvinced, consider this. China isn't the only culture to build according to energetic geometry. The pyramids of Giza, the temples of Angkor, the Nazca lines, all seem to sit on planetary alignments where ley lines and astronomical markers converge. What if the ancients saw something we've forgotten? What if they knew that the earth breathes and that building in harmony with her breath is the difference between ruin and rebirth? You're standing now on a quiet hill in the countryside. Beneath your feet, a dragon vein curls like a sleeping serpent. To the west lies a burial mound, the tomb of a long-forgotten scholar. The wind picks up, carrying a scent of moss and pine, and for a moment, you feel it. A pull, not magnetic, not spiritual, something deeper, as if the ground remembers your footsteps before you even take them. The ancient Chinese believed that when you die, your soul travels along these veins carried home to the stars. That's why tombs were placed at dragon nodes, where energy accumulates like a heartbeat. A final ride on the Earth's hidden highways. Maybe it's myth, or maybe it's physics we haven't learned yet. Either way, you stand on the edge of mystery, not above it, but within it. You've journeyed from tombs to stargates, from alchemy to underwater scripts, from flying chariots to the soft hush of silk. And now, here at the edge of the Earth's breath, you realize the greatest mysteries weren't about kings or artifacts. They were always about connection, between land and sky, past and present, you and everything. You're still standing on that hilltop, quiet now, the world exhaling around you. Beneath your feet, the dragon veins still hum, faint but steady, like a lullaby written in stone. All around you lie the echoes of everything we've explored tonight: tombs and texts, rivers and riddles, gods and ghosts. And above, the sky fades to the kind of night that makes time feel optional. But before we let go completely, there's one last journey to take. Let's step not into a tomb or temple, but into you, the curious traveler who's followed these stories across 3 silent hours. Why do these ancient Chinese mysteries matter? Because they persist. Despite dynasties, crumbling languages, changing, and empires rising and falling, these riddles continue to glow like lanterns in a fog. Some people say history is a straight line. Others say it's a cycle. But in China's case, it may be neither. It's more like a web, a pattern, a series of interconnected questions that pull on each other through time. You see it in the terracotta warriors, where every face is unique, like someone remembered the names of 1,000 soldiers and refused to let them fade. You feel it in the Sanxing Dui masks, too alien to be easily explained, too human to be dismissed. You walk it in the Long Yu caves carved by hands who never left their names. And you breathe it in the silken wraps of Mawang Dui, where even the dead seem to wait, suspended in time. From oracle bones to star charts, from the I Ching to the floating towers of myth, every chapter we've whispered through tonight has told you something more than a fact. It told you that we're not the first to wonder, not the first to look up at the stars and think, how did we get here? And maybe that's what binds these mysteries together, not their answers, but their refusal to end. Because history at its best isn't about solving everything. It's about staying curious, staying soft, staying open. Just like the river under Baiheliang. Just like the breath of a dragon vein. The ancients built things to last. They carved into stone. They coded symbols into the landscape. They painted galaxies onto silk and buried secrets in places they knew we'd eventually find when we were ready. And maybe we are. Maybe the reason you're here listening in the dark is because a part of you never stopped believing that something older than science, older than reason, might still be whispering under the surface. So let's stay here a little longer. The wind has slowed. The sky has deepened. And the earth beneath your resting body is not silent, it's patient. Maybe tonight you don't need all the answers. Maybe it's enough to know that long ago someone stood on this same hill, under these same stars and wondered the same things. And maybe, just maybe, they're still listening. Let your breath slow. No more tombs to unlock. No more riddles to decode. Just you, the hush of the night, and the gentle rhythm of your thoughts settling like ancient dust. The air around you is soft now, thick with the kind of stillness that only comes when the world has truly fallen asleep. Imagine the hush of the forbidden city at midnight. No footsteps, no echoes. Just the cool sigh of empty courtyards and the flicker of lanterns long since extinguished. Feel the ground beneath you. It's been there for ages, before emperors, before scrolls, before questions. It's solid, quiet, familiar. You're not drifting, you're returning. Let the images fade, the jade statues, the cosmic maps, the river stones, the bronze mirrors. Let them become part of the dream. The kind you forget in the morning, but that leaves something behind. A feeling, a shimmer, a thread. Your breath is slow now. Your pulse matches the low rhythm of the earth's own turning. There's nothing left to search for tonight. You've wandered through 30 chambers of wonder, and now it's time to close the door behind you. Gently, silently. Tomorrow there will be time to ask more questions, to open more scrolls. But for now, just rest. Sleep deep, friend. You're home.